Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 1491, For the Volcanic Ash. The subsequent recruitment work was indeed much smoother. Seeing that the recruitment point was full of maple syrup, compressed biscuits and salted fish, and the selected recruits were allowed to eat them, many rumors were refuted. Although the taste of roasted salted fish is not very good at present because there is no cumin powder, it is much better than nothing. Moreover, the maple syrup compressed biscuits mixed with maple syrup are sweet, which is an absolutely indescribable enjoyment for ordinary Europeans in this era. In this era, I am afraid that only nobles have the opportunity to eat sweets frequently, and ordinary people have no chance to eat sweet things at all. For ordinary people, the only opportunity to come into contact with sweetness is probably when eating fruits. For example, ripe apples are the only opportunity for many ordinary Europeans to come into contact with sweetness. Now, the soldiers of the North Sea Kingdom can eat sweet biscuits almost every day and every meal. How can it not make people excited? Of course, in fact, the soldiers of the North Sea Kingdom do not usually eat maple syrup compressed biscuits. Because, strictly speaking, compressed biscuits are food that will only be used in wartime. Usually, everyone still eats black bread. Then, add Chinese fast food. That tastes much richer than compressed biscuits, and the nutrition is more comprehensive. But these guys who participated in the recruitment in southern Germany didn't know that. They thought that eating sweet compressed biscuits was an emperor's enjoyment. Just like the joke said, the emperor must drink 2 bowls of soy milk at every meal, 1 bowl, and 1 bowl. Under the temptation of delicious food, the anti-propaganda of those princes could hardly stop the enthusiasm of those guys in the mountainous areas of southern Germany to apply. After eating a few sweet biscuits and grilled salted fish, some young men who were not selected also stayed at the recruitment office and refused to leave. In desperation, the person in charge of the recruitment office contacted the mainland with a carrier pigeon and asked for a disposal plan. Marin saw the report and happily ordered, bring them all back. Even if you can't be a soldier, you can take them to America as immigrants. It just so happens that there is a shortage of people there. As time goes by, the arrival of September indicates that some parts of southern Europe will start the autumn harvest. Of course, the North Sea Kingdom in the north will also harvest at the same time. The autumn harvest in southern Europe is because the climate here is warm, the latitude is low, and the planting is earlier than in the north, so the autumn harvest is naturally earlier. The autumn harvest in the North Sea Kingdom was purely due to the application of phosphate fertilizers. However, although the North Sea Kingdom has many provinces, only 5 provinces, namely East Frisia, West Frisia, Oldenburg, Schleswig and North Munster, have used new fertilizers. In other regions, only volcanic ash was partially used. Therefore, only these 5 provinces began to harvest crops in September. Other provinces will have to wait until October. At this time, Louis XII, who was in Naples, was also very concerned about the autumn harvest. Mainly, to see the effect of volcanic ash. Since occupying the Kingdom of Naples, Louis XII dug a large amount of volcanic ash from the Kingdom of Naples, transported it back to his homeland, and tried it in the Provence region in southwestern France near Italy, mainly for the barley fields of some local estates belonging to the royal family. Today, the barley in the Provence region has almost begun to be harvested. Therefore, Louis XII is now very concerned about the yield of barley there. If it is consistent with the results of the previous small-scale experiment in Paris, then France will do its best to take over the Kingdom of Naples. If the results were different, Louis XII would have to consider whether to give in. While Louis XII was anxiously waiting, finally, one day a carrier pigeon brought the news. "Your Majesty, great news." Count Duarte, who was in charge of intelligence under Louis XII, waved a secret letter and trotted over to report to Louis XII happily. Louis XII also stood up and asked anxiously, "How is it? How is the situation?" After taking a breath, Count Duarte reported, according to the report from the royal estate on the outskirts of Provence, after using volcanic ash, the barley yield there has increased from more than 2,200 pounds per bonnier, ancient French unit of area, equivalent to 1 hectare, equivalent to about 150 pounds per mu, to more than 3,300 pounds, equivalent to 220 pounds per mu, and the improvement effect has reached half. When Louis XII heard this, he really showed ecstasy on his face. Although it was only a 50% increase, it was also great news. After all, each bonnier is increased by 1,100 pounds, and 10,000 bonniers is an increase of 11 million pounds. Such an increase is enough for France to launch a large-scale war. Even if tens of thousands of war horses are dispatched, there is no need to worry about insufficient food and grass. Moreover, even if there is no war, the extra food can be sold for money. The only drawback is that the volcanic ash production of the Kingdom of Naples is limited and cannot be provided to the whole of France. It is only enough to provide for the needs of the French royal territory. But this is enough. Louis XII hopes that the royal family will be strong and other nobles will be weakened. The royal family has sufficient money and food to ensure absolute control over the Kingdom of France. There are probably tens of thousands of bonniers of arable land belonging to the French royal family. If all volcanic ash is used, it can be foreseen that tens of millions of pounds of food can be produced each year. So much food can definitely support France to launch a large-scale war against Spain. Even if it does not fight with Spain, it can also fight with Austria. Anyway, France had long been eyeing the rich Netherlands region. If it could be taken away from Austria. At this moment, Louis XII was full of ambition and vision for the future. At the same time, he also made up his mind to fight the Spaniards to the end. For the volcanic ash of the Kingdom of Naples and for the French imperial hegemony, he had to fight to the death. In fact, Louis XII didn't know that not all volcanic ashes had such a strong fertilizer effect. It was also a coincidence that the volcanic ash from the several volcanoes obtained by the French happened to be suitable as fertilizer for crops. But not all volcanic ashes are suitable as fertilizers. Some volcanic ashes are even harmful to crops because they are rich in toxic substances. Moreover, the newly erupted volcanic ash cannot be used as fertilizer immediately. It needs to be mixed with ordinary soil in the local area for many years before it can become fertile soil. Even some volcanic ash soils have grown various plants for many years. After the plants die, they rot and become highly nutritious impurities. They accumulate from generation to generation and naturally become more fertile. But the French didn't know that the lucky volcanoes they chose happened to have large areas of volcanic ash fertile soil. Then, they firmly believed that volcanic ash soil was the best fertilizer. Just like the volcanic ash in Iceland that Marin is developing now, because Iceland is cold, there are not many plants that can grow on volcanic ash soil, and there are few impurities, so it is not considered very good volcanic ash. However, before Marin distributed the volcanic ash to the people below, he added a lot of materials to it, such as potassium salt and apatite, etc., to enhance the effect, which is not worse than those volcanic ashes with good fertilizer effect. Louis XII was unaware of the various possibilities of volcanic ash. He thought that as long as it was volcanic ash soil, it would be the best fertilizer. At this time, he had regarded volcanic ash as the only reliance for France's rise and dominance in Europe. At an internal meeting with only a few confidants present, Louis XII shouted excitedly, "For volcanic ash! For France!" Obviously, Louis XII was mentally prepared to fight Spain to the death. Chapter 1492, The Trouble with Too Much Food. While Europe was experiencing a bumper harvest, the harvest in the American colonies was even more frightening. In particular, the New York colony, which had been developed for several years. Since Marin sent thousands of troops and dozens of warriors from the Wolf Fang Commando to the New York colony, the local army has launched a cleanup and annexation of the surrounding tribes. In addition to the hostile Mohicans being driven away, many local Delaware tribes were bribed and won over by Albert with food offensives. Albert was not good at using troops, but he especially liked to bribe the natives with benefits. The Delaware people near New York are all matriarchal clans, where women have the final say. Women are the easiest to fool and bribe. Albert often entertains local female matriarchs, and keeps sending beautiful clothes and glass beads, which makes these female matriarchs fall. Even several Delaware matriarchs in their 40s almost fell in love with Albert and wanted to recommend themselves to him. Fortunately, Albert had his wife Maria in charge, which prevented Albert from being pushed back by those old women. Then, in order to obtain the territory of the Delaware people, Albert cut down trees in the middle reaches of the Hudson River, built several small towns, and encouraged the Delaware people to move there. In order to encourage the Delaware people to move to the middle and upper reaches of the Hudson River, Albert spent a lot of money to repair houses for the Delaware people, and promised to give them thousands of cattle and thousands of sheep. In addition, Albert agreed to provide the Delaware people with enough salt regularly and teach them cooking skills. There are ready-made houses and fertile land near the water. In addition, Albert agreed to guide them to farm and provide fertilizer. Then, most of the Delaware people agreed and moved to the new town of Albany happily. The name of this town is the name of the future that Marin plagiarized lazily. When he heard Albert say that this place was about 225 kilometers upstream from New York, Marin immediately remembered that this was the location of Albany, the capital of New York State in the future, and simply named it Albany. Then, more than 9,000 Delaware people from about 20 tribes from New York to Philadelphia all moved to Albany and lived in the houses built by Albert for them. Albert didn't actually build very good houses for the Delaware people. He just built more than 3,000 adobe houses for them. They were made of yellow mud and thatch, and the cost was very low. However, each of these adobe houses had a Chinese-style earth stove and chimney, which was convenient for cooking. Moreover, they all had a kong. This was very important for the area near New York. The winter in the northeastern United States was very cold, and many Delaware people would freeze to death every winter. The adobe houses with kangs built by Albert for the Delaware people were very warm in winter. After experiencing them, many Delaware people agreed to move there. Especially in the winter of the past few years, when it was the most difficult, Albert would send people to lobby those Delaware people who had not yet moved, and take them to Albany to experience the benefits of the kangs in adobe houses. After a few years, Albert finally got nearly 10,000 Delaware people near New York and sent them to Albany. Then, the land originally inhabited by the Delaware people was completely empty. From New York to Albert's fiefdom Philadelphia, there is no one now. Albert quickly applied to transfer English immigrants from Cape Breton Island. At the beginning, Marin brought tens of thousands of refugees from England, but most of them stayed in Cape Breton Island. However, the corner of Cape Breton Island can only grow cold-resistant rye or graze sheep, which is a waste of labor. Therefore, after Albert applied to Marin, half of the population of Cape Breton Island, about 20,000 people, were moved to the area between New York and Philadelphia, which is the area of New Jersey in the future. This large piece of land is about 20,000 square kilometers. Moreover, because it was the Delaware people who took the initiative to move away, there were basically no indigenous people in the area who posed any threat to the immigrants. More than 20,000 English farmers arrived at the local area and quickly cut down trees, reclaimed farmland, and established several towns and dozens of villages. The newly opened arable land in the local area is as much as 100,000 acres. Moreover, this number is still growing. After all, New Jersey has an area of 20,000 square kilometers, and it is effortless to reclaim more than 1 million acres of arable land. Therefore, in the autumn harvest of 1513, the agricultural output of the New York colony was a bit terrifying. Originally, the New York colony had 50,000 acres of arable land. In addition, 100,000 acres were reclaimed in the New Jersey area, and the arable land of the entire colony reached 200,000 acres. The most terrifying thing is that among them, in addition to 20,000 acres used to grow soybean oil and 10,000 acres used to grow mung beans, peanuts and various vegetables, the other 120,000 acres were actually planted with wheat. Moreover, because Marin brought thousands of Han immigrants, under the guidance of those Han farmers, local immigrants quickly mastered many techniques for growing wheat. Although the average yield per acre here is less than 400 pounds due to insufficient fertilizer. But this is wheat. Even if there is only 300 pounds of wheat per acre, 120,000 acres, that is, 720,000 acres, is still 216 million pounds. And the price of wheat is 5 times that of rye, reaching 5 pfennigs per pound. Then, 200 million pounds can be sold for 1 billion pfennigs, which is 16.667 million gold coins when converted into gold coins. Of course, this is just YY, and it is impossible to cash it all. If Marin dares to dump wheat back to Europe like this, it will definitely cause jealousy and madness in all of Europe. Before the development of large battleships and Pexin guns, Marin had to admit damn, such a high wheat yield is meaningless. When the news came back to his homeland, Marin was depressed after seeing the report. Because he obviously has so much food, but he can't cash it in. What's the difference between this and hoarding houses in modern times? The house prices are also high, but they just can't be sold. Moreover, even if these wheats are taken back to the country for consumption, they can't be eaten. After all, it is impossible to give wheat to ordinary people. If this is true, the North Sea Kingdom will probably be envied to death. Because, in this era, most European nobles dare not say that they eat wheat bread every meal. If ordinary people in the North Sea Kingdom could reach this level, what they would gain would not be envy, but jealousy or even hatred. So, Marin reluctantly replied to Albert, "You can eat it yourself. Anyway, these wheats cannot be transported back to the mainland to eat. However, the people in the colonies can still eat it." Marin's reply led to the people in the North American colonies starting a luxurious life of eating white bread every meal. Of course, it is not appropriate to give all the food to the people in the colonies. Marin thought about it and decided to extract some wheat to make maple syrup compressed biscuits. Before, maple syrup compressed biscuits were made of rye, and the taste was average. Marin plans to use wheat instead of rye to make maple syrup compressed biscuits for military supply. Of course, a little rye flour will be added to cover the color. After all, if it is spread that the North Sea Army eats white flour biscuits every meal, it will also be hated. And using white flour to make biscuits will taste much better. White flour every meal, plus grilled fish and some bacon and canned food. Marin suddenly felt that this is a bit like the US military in later generations. Perhaps, only the US military would have such luxurious food rations. Before World War II, the US military probably had the best food rations in the world. At that time, the US military had white bread and canned beef for every meal, and also provided Coke. It was simply too luxurious. It is said that during World War I, the British and American armies joined forces. As a result, when the American soldiers saw that the food was canned beef again, they were so depressed that they threw it away directly. Because they were tired of eating beef. The friendly British soldiers were stunned when they saw it. Nima, beef is also thrown away. I eat dry bread. But the British Empire still has to save face, so when it was night, the British soldiers took the initiative to quietly pick up the canned beef thrown away by the American soldiers and eat it secretly. There is no way, the Americans are so awesome. Who says that the American land is so fertile and suitable for agriculture? There are too many arable lands, and there is enough wheat to feed livestock. There are too many pastures, and there is enough beef to feed ordinary soldiers every meal. It is said that during the Civil War, the US military began to eat inhumanely. At that time, the federal soldiers in the northern United States could get 12 ounces of pork or bacon, or 1 pound 4 ounces of beef every day, 1 pound 6 ounces of white bread or flour. In addition, there were beans, tea, sugar and various vegetables. While in Europe at the same time, the Germans and Russians were still eating mashed potatoes and black bread. The French were rich, but during the Franco-Prussian War, the food supply of the French army was less than half of that of the US Army. There is really no way. Who says that the United States has so much arable land and pastures? The output is so large that there is no place to consume it, so it can only be used to feed the soldiers. Now Marin is also worried about this, because there is no place to consume the food, and it is too extravagant to use wheat to make wine. Therefore, Marin's opinion is to use wheat as military rations. At that time, the ratio of wheat flour to rye in the military compressed biscuits will be set at 7:3. In this way, the taste of the biscuits will be improved, and the color of the white flour can be covered with rye flour, so that outsiders will not feel the inhumanity of the Bahai army. At the same time, the bagging technology of cumin grilled fish is also under research. At that time, after the salted fish is sprinkled with cumin powder and baked, it will be put into an oil paper bag, isolated from the air, heated and sealed. Although it is not enough for ordinary soldiers to eat beef every meal, in this era, being able to eat grilled salted fish frequently can be comparable to American soldiers in later generations. In addition, the Bahai army occasionally supplies some bacon, sausages, dried radish and sauerkraut. When the fruit production in Cuba increases, we can provide canned fruit during festivals. As for canned beef, forget it, nowadays even nobles can rarely eat beef. And if this treatment is told to the poor soldiers of other countries, they will surely drool. Especially the Ming soldiers whose military rations are withheld and exploited by their officers. Chapter 1493 Prince William. To be honest, the officers of the North Sea Kingdom did not think about drinking the blood of the soldiers, but Marin blocked the gap in advance. Because Marin established a complete logistics system to prevent military commanders from interfering. Moreover, a gendarmerie was set up in the army to patrol constantly. In this way, it is difficult and risky to reach out. Moreover, the bagged compressed biscuits, invented by Marin, are very difficult to embezzle. The compressed biscuits in each bag are fixed in quantity. If the soldiers don't tear them open to eat, you can't deduct them. There are 3 pieces in a bag of compressed biscuits, just enough for 3 meals. Soldiers receive a bag every day, can you not give it? Even if they eat fast food in a camp, the gendarmerie will watch them tightly and not let them do anything. Therefore, the generals gave up the possibility of intervening. In other armies of the same era, the commanders had too much power, and all the supplies had to pass through their hands, which was simply delivered to them for corruption. If you don't do it, you will probably be regarded as a fool. In the most miserable Ming dynasty, not only did the generals drink the blood of the soldiers, but before the court allocated it, the civil officials had to plunder a layer, and then it was the turn of the generals to drink the blood of the soldiers. Therefore, facing layers of exploitation, the bottom soldiers of the Ming dynasty were very miserable. It was good to have something to eat. What else can you think? Unless it is the personal soldiers of the generals, they are qualified to eat and drink spicy. Marin established a complete logistics system and let the gendarmerie watch day and night. Those generals wanted to intervene, but they had no chance. What's more, in the Bahai National Army, it was not the commander who was in charge of life affairs, but the instructor. But even if it was the instructor, Marin did not give them the opportunity to pass it over. He only gave them the right to check and supervise, but not the right to dispatch supplies. Because many instructors in the North Sea Kingdom came from the church and were best at corruption, Marin did not dare to give them the supplies for distribution. In addition to a lot of good news from the New York colony, a lot of good news was also sent back from the Argentine colony and the Savannah colony. The Pampas is really easy to cultivate, because there is no need to cut down trees or dig up tree roots, so it is very convenient to cultivate there. Moreover, the local prairie is very suitable for the expansion of the Cossack cavalry. At present, the area near the mouth of the La Plata River in the Pampas has been conquered by the Cossack cavalry. The local population has reached 20,000, and the cultivated land has reached as much as 300,000 acres. Because there are few people and many fields, the Pampas colony keeps requesting to increase the immigrant population. Or, allow the introduction of black slaves. But Marin doesn't have many people now, and he is full of worries about the introduction of black slaves. So, he can only keep the status quo for the time being. But this also reminded Marin that agriculture in this era still depends on population. In the era without large agricultural machinery, if you want to grow more land, you can only increase the labor force. Otherwise, even if there is more land, you can only watch it. Or, just use it to herd sheep. Because sheepdogs can be used to help herd sheep to solve the problem of insufficient manpower. As for the Savannah colony, under Marin's deliberate arrangement, it specializes in cotton planting and the planting of bamboo, lacquer trees, and oil drums. Now, after the first batch of seeds brought back by Kong Tai were planted, the lacquer trees and tung trees have not grown to the point where they can be produced, but the bamboo has grown a lot. After all, bamboo only takes 2 or 3 years to grow up, while lacquer trees and tung trees need several years to produce. However, Marin ordered a ban on cutting down mature bamboos. Because, if bamboos are left, they can run everywhere. After the rain every spring, bamboo shoots run everywhere, and the existence of mother bamboos is very conducive to the increase in the number of bamboos. When the bamboo is large enough, it can provide a large number of bamboo strips for the North Sea Kingdom to build bamboo-reinforced concrete buildings and dams. Therefore, at present, bamboo, lacquer trees and tung trees in the Savannah colony have not been produced. However, cotton has begun to be mass-produced. After all, cotton is an annual crop. After the introduction of upland cotton varieties from Mexico, after several years of cultivation, Savannah has planted thousands of acres of Mexican upland cotton. After bringing back craftsmen who can fluff cotton and make cotton spinning machines from the Ming dynasty, local cotton production has gradually begun to form an industry. It can be predicted that Savannah will become a cotton spinning center in the future, providing cotton textiles and a large number of quilts for the North Sea. As for Cuba, a large amount of sugar cane was naturally sent back. At the same time, a large amount of sisal fiber was also sent back. Compared with sugar cane, sisal is Marin's favorite thing. With these sisal fibers, the cables of the North Sea warships can be replaced with sisal ropes. Even steering wheel cables and sails can use sisal fibers in large quantities. The mass production of sisal fibers will greatly promote the navigation industry of the North Sea. In the room, Marin was writing furiously, writing about the huge future plans of the North Sea. Thinking of the beautiful future, Marin smiled. At this time, the door of the office was suddenly pushed open. Marin was furious. Who is so rude? Don't you know to knock on the door? But Caesar ran in breathlessly, took Marin's arm and left, and said anxiously, Dad, hurry. Mom. Mom. What's wrong with Mom? Marin was startled, and the ink on the quill pen spilled on the plan. Mom is about to give birth. The midwife behind said that the amniotic fluid broke. Caesar, who had taken a breath, finally finished his words. Fuck, the amniotic fluid broke. Marin jumped up immediately. As a father, he knew that the baby was about to be born. So, he hurried back to the backyard of the palace with Caesar and came to the outside of the delivery room. Angela's voice of screaming in pain came from the delivery room, but compared with the time when Caesar was born 10 years ago, this time was obviously much quieter. This is no wonder, after all, it is not Angela's first time to give birth, she has a lot of experience, and she is not as nervous as last time. In order to ensure safety, Ma Lin said to Luan, the doctor who was standing at the door of the delivery room and guiding the midwives through the door, with a serious face, Dr. Lu, please go in. Luan was stunned and said, Grand Duke, this is not appropriate, right? I have to avoid suspicion. Ma Lin waved his hand and said, what's the point of avoiding suspicion? Human life is the most important. Please, I hope both mother and child are safe. Luen looked at Marin with a serious face, hesitated for a while, and still went into the delivery room. Maybe Marin paid attention to controlling fat intake in the past few months, so Angela did not get fat because of pregnancy. Therefore, the baby does not seem to be huge. During the delivery, Luen and a group of midwives studied the episiotomy for natural delivery for several months, but they did not use it. Only the forceps helped a little. Before dusk, Angela finally gave birth. Congratulations, Grand Duke, it's a little prince. Both mother and child are safe. Luen came out sweating. Just now, he was very nervous. After all, if something went wrong, who knows if Marin would be angry with him. When Marin heard that the mother and child were safe, he immediately laughed happily. He first entered the delivery room and comforted the exhausted Angela, then happily held up the wrinkled little son. From this moment on, the North Sea Kingdom's heir crisis no longer existed. Caesar is already 11 years old and in good health. Now that he has a little son, Marin no longer feels that he is in danger of extinction. Dear, give the child a name. Angela said weakly. Well, this name has been chosen a long time ago. It has been chosen a long time ago. Angela was confused. Have you forgotten Port William? When Port William was first built, I said, if you give birth to a prince, he'll be named William. Chapter 1494, The Duke of Pampas. If William was born in the second or third year after Caesar was born, then Marin might not be too excited about Caesar's arrival. Just like the illegitimate son Robert, Marin didn't feel very deeply. However, William gave birth to William 11 years after Angela gave birth to Caesar. During this period, Marin and Angela waited for 11 years. Coupled with the change of mentality before and after going to the Ming dynasty, Marin was very happy about William's birth. In order to celebrate William's birth, Marin ordered the army to fire 21 salutes. At the same time, Marin held a banquet at various intersections in Oryx City, inviting the people of the city to eat and drink for free. In addition to feasting the people of the city, Marin also ordered his brother's manor under his name to give the serfs extra meals to celebrate the birth of the second prince. Of course, the extra meal is actually just adding a salted fish to the serfs' meals. Salted fish may be rare in inland German countries, but Marin, who acts as a fishery in Newfoundland, has too many in his hands. Marin has decided to add 100 large and medium-sized fishing boats to the Newfoundland fishing grounds, and use winch trawls to fish in the Newfoundland fishing grounds. In addition, Marin also plans to add 20 whaling teams to professionally hunt whales to provide sufficient whale meat and whale oil. It can be foreseen that there will not be too much fish in the North Sea in the future. In order to make the fish meat taste better, Marin plans to build a cannery on the island of Newfoundland to produce canned sauerkraut fish. Using the sauerkraut produced in the North Sea country and the freshly caught sea fish, adding ginger slices and peppers, it is made into canned sauerkraut fish for local supply. This time, with the help of William's birth, Marin gave the people an extra meal, which was also a warm-up. When the production in the Newfoundland fishing grounds expands, everyone will get used to eating fish frequently. At this time, in the Newfoundland fishing grounds, in addition to Marin's fleet, there are local Indian fishermen with extremely low catches, and there are no other competitors at all. Therefore, what lies before Marin is an endless catch. Even after the North Sea Kingdom annexed the 8 vassal states, the total population was only more than 2 million. Even if 3 meals a day were all fish, it would be far from enough to eat all the catch from the Newfoundland fishing grounds. In addition, Marin took advantage of William's birth to please the citizens of the 8 newly annexed vassal states. Although salted fish is not a rare thing, Marin can still win some people's hearts by giving them a few meals for free. With the help of this celebration, Marin also hopes to ease the relationship with the people of the 8 newly annexed vassal states. For this reason, in the 8 newly conquered vassal states, Marin's salted fish was not only distributed to the manors under his own name, but all distributed to please the locals. Later, Marin also held a grand baby baptism ceremony for Prince William. The specifications of this baptism ceremony were very high, and Bishop Taylor of the North Sea Kingdom did not get the opportunity to baptize Prince William. Because Marin sent a pigeon to Italy to invite his ally, the future Pope Leo X, who is now Archbishop Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici. Moreover, Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici also agreed to be William's godfather. Now, people may not think anything. But when Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici becomes Pope in a few years, William will be awesome. The Pope's godson, that is an identity that can walk sideways in Europe. In fact, William's brother Caesar was also baptized by the Pope. Well, the one who baptized Caesar was the current Pope Julius II, who was in exile at that time. However, considering that Caesar is the grandson of Julius II did not accept Caesar as his godson. After all, the two are of different generations. If a grandfather accepts his grandson as a godson, he will be laughed at. However, because he was baptized by the current pope, Caesar still has his own halo. And his younger brother William is even more awesome, recognizing the future pope as his godfather. Although Caesar is the grandson of the current pope, this relationship cannot be made public. But William's godfather, the future relationship can be made public. In the future, if the second generation has a conflict, William can just shout, "My godfather is the pope, dare you touch me?" Of course, Marin doesn't want William to grow up to be such a fool in the future. But this halo, even if William doesn't say it himself, others know it. As for those who don't know, they can't embarrass William. Because William must be protected by a group of thugs. Unless, William, like those stupid second generations in TV dramas, sneaks out without guards. For such people, Marin thinks it's not a pity to die. The emperor also brought thugs when he went on a private visit. Kong Matsi, played by teacher Guoli, not only brought thugs on a private visit, but also Yu Shilong, a big man with soldiers, was nearby to protect him. When in danger or when there is a task, Yu Shilong will show up with a large group of people. This is the correct way to open it. As for those who deliberately avoid the guards and run away, it's normal to die, it's lucky not to die. On the night of the baptism ceremony, Caesar, who was only 11 years old, suffered from insomnia. The next day, Caesar asked Marin with dark circles under his eyes, "Dad, you made such a big show for William, are you going to hand over the North Sea Kingdom to William in the future?" Marin was stunned. "Why do you think so?" Caesar said aggrievedly, "You arranged a marriage between me and Margaret, which clearly means that you want me to be the King of England. So, are you going to hand over the Grand Duke of the Grand Duchy of the North Sea to William?" Marin laughed and touched Caesar's head. He did not answer Caesar immediately, but asked, "So, are you reluctant to give the Beihai state to his brother?" After Caesar twisted for a while, he said, "It's a bit reluctant. After all, Beihai is the place where I grow up. In my eyes, Aulic is better than London. I feel like this. Not to kill his younger brother like those spoiled babies in the future." In the 21st century, there were many bear children in Huaxiao. Caesar is just reluctant to leave his old nest. Relieved, Marin laughed and said, "Don't worry, my little Caesar, the North Sea Kingdom is still yours. But I plan to give a large piece of the colony in America to your brother. Do you have any objection?" Caesar shook his head and said, "I don't mind, as long as it's not my homeland, I have no objection." Marin took out the map and pointed to Caesar, saying, "Look, it's here, South America thousands of miles away. I plan to make William the Duke of Pampas and give William the Pampas." Caesar blinked at the map of America and said, "It's just such a small area. Will my brother be unhappy?" Marin laughed and said, "No, this Pampas is several times the size of the North Sea Kingdom. If it weren't too far from my homeland and inconvenient to manage, I might not be willing to give it to him. In North America at this time, there is plenty of land beside the big rivers. For example, along the Hudson River, Albert directed immigrants to reclaim tens of thousands of acres of arable land. This is only the area along the lower reaches of the Hudson River, not to mention that the Hudson River is just an inconspicuous small river among the countless rivers in North America. If it is a super river like the Mississippi River, there will be more land that can be reclaimed. If all of North America is reclaimed, the grain and beef produced can feed the people of Europe to death." Chapter 1496 The Importance of Trains. After listening to Marin's explanation, Caesar was so surprised that he could stuff an egg in his mouth. He really didn't expect that America, which was desperately promoted by his father Marin as a wild land, was so rich and vast. At the same time, he also clearly realized that he was about to inherit an extremely large empire. Because Marin clearly said that the North American colonies alone would be several times larger than Western Europe. "Dad, can we defend such a large territory?" Caesar was a little worried. He knew that the population of the North Sea Kingdom was too small, only more than 2 million. The Kingdom of France has a population of more than 15 million. Even Spain has a population of 7 or 8 million. With a population of more than 2 million, it is not enough to develop the local area, let alone develop land that is several times larger than Western Europe. Marin laughed and introduced him to the Peksang guns and 1,000-ton warships that were under research, and said confidently, "As long as this kind of weapon is developed, the North Sea Kingdom will be equipped with hundreds of ships. Then, no one in Europe will be our opponent. We don't need to defeat all opponents on land, as long as we sink all the opponents' ships. After all, if you want to compete with us for the American colonies, you must first have a fleet." After Caesar thought for a long time, he suddenly realized, I understand, Dad, you let me marry the British Princess Margaret in order to get the huge British fleet. With the new cannons and warships you mentioned, plus the huge scale of England's ships, we can protect the interests of the American colonies, right? Marin snapped his fingers and said happily, that's right, son, you are so smart. If it weren't for the huge colonies, I would have let you marry Princess Anna of the Kingdom of Bohemia. In this way, you can get the 2 crowns of the Kingdom of Bohemia and the Kingdom of Hungary, plus the Duchy of Silesia. But Caesar frowned and said, that's not right. Doesn't His Majesty Vladislaus II have Prince Lajos? How can you say that marrying Princess Anna will allow you to annex Bohemia and Hungary? Marin smiled and didn't explain. He couldn't tell his son that this was future history, could he? Moreover, now that he has traveled through time, he has also influenced history. Then, Lajos II may not necessarily die at the hands of the Turks as in the original history. But in any case, that is a headache for others. After all, his second son William is too young. If he was born earlier, maybe Marin would let him marry Princess Anna. But now, I'm afraid there is no chance. After all, Princess Anna is much older than William. Looking at the standard map of America drawn by Marin, Caesar's heart was surging. He felt that he owned the whole world. Because, according to Marin, the area of North America is twice as large as the whole of Europe. If he could keep and rule such a large place, he would really own the whole world. However, looking at the map, Caesar suddenly thought of a question, Dad, America is so big that it is not convenient to transmit information. So, how can we maintain the rule of such a large territory at that time? You see, these undeveloped places must have inconvenient transportation. If there is a rebellion in the central region of North America, we can use pigeons to transmit messages. However, how to mobilize troops to suppress the rebellion? After all, it is very difficult to send troops deep into the inland areas. Then, in the end, we may only be able to maintain the rule in the coastal areas and along the banks of the rivers. Caesar's question is to the point and directly points out the core problem. Just like someone asked, why didn't China expand more territory in history? It's not that it can't, but it can't maintain its rule even if it expands. After all, transportation in ancient times was too inconvenient. Why did the Mongol Empire sweep across Eurasia, but finally had to divide the 4 khanates? It's not that the central government of the Yuan dynasty didn't want to unify management, but that the 4 khanates were too far away from the central plains and couldn't be taken care of at all. The only way is to divide the 4 khanates to manage them. In order to beat the Huns, Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty mobilized the power of the entire Han Empire, dispatched countless war horses and ox carts to transport supplies. In the Battle of Mabe alone, the Han dynasty dispatched 240,000 horses and 500,000 troops, spending countless money and food. The 15-year war caused the Han dynasty to lose more than 100,000 young and strong people, and hundreds of thousands of war horses. The loss of food and money was countless, and all the assets left over from the Wenjing era were lost. In desperation, Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty had to stop the northern expedition, issued a self-blame edict, and began to restore national strength. Among them, the loss of money and food was mostly not used in combat, but in the march and transportation. From Guangzhou, the core area of the Han dynasty, the money and food needed by hundreds of thousands of troops were transported to Mabe thousands of miles away, and the loss of food and grass along the way was extremely shocking. The time of actual engagement with the Huns was actually very short, and most of the time and money were basically spent halfway. Therefore, after the dynasties obtained the central plains, they were generally no longer willing to expand. Especially the territory on the grassland, there are few benefits from conquering it, and it costs a lot of money and food, which is not cost-effective. Generally speaking, only powerful dynasties like the Han and Tang dynasties, or minority dynasties like the Yuan dynasty and the Qin dynasty, would be willing to seize and operate the Mabe and western regions. Because the cost of operating Mabe and the western regions is too high. Unless there are enough grassland cavalry available. Facing Caesar's thinking, Marin was very pleased. This is indeed the biggest problem in colonization. After the Europeans' great voyages, they could only wander around the coast of the colonies for hundreds of years, until the emergence of trains. The emergence of trains made it very simple for the colonists' army to enter the inland from the coast. Not only is it fast, but the transportation capacity is also large. Therefore, starting from the 19th century, the colonists were able to really develop a relatively comprehensive colonization of inland countries. At that time, wherever the railway was built, the colonists' power expanded there. Similarly, trains are also of great significance to countries with large areas. For example, in the United States, when the Civil War just ended, the United States' control over the western region was still quite weak. At that time, people who went to California to pan for gold wanted to bring gold back to the east, so they had to take a ship around South America and return to the eastern coast. For this reason, a ship carrying gold called the Central America sank. After the Civil War, the United States relied on policy incentives to encourage private construction of the Pacific Railway. To this end, the U.S. government did not hesitate to give the land along the railway to private individuals who built the railway. Through this policy, the enthusiasm of private companies to build railways was greatly stimulated, and the Pacific Railway took 6 years to build. And the Americans also finally completed the control of several western states through the railway. Before that, Americans had to take a ship around South America to go to California. Similarly, although Russia occupied the Siberian region at the beginning, its control over the Far East was quite weak. It was not until the completion of the construction of the Siberian Railway in the late 19th century and the early 20th century that Russia had the ability to deploy forces to the Far East on a large scale. But ironically, after the completion of the Siberian Railway in 1916, the Tsarist Russia collapsed the following year and was replaced by the Soviet Union. In the Russo-Japanese War that broke out before the completion of the Siberian Railway, the Russians were defeated by the Japanese because they were unable to transport the million-strong army that crushed Europe to the Far East in time. You know, in that war, the number of Japanese deaths was actually much higher than that of Russia. But the Tsarist Russia had a million-strong army, but it could not be transported from Europe, which gave Japan the opportunity to win. The Battle of Namihan that broke out more than 30 years later was because the Soviet Union was able to transport large-scale aircraft, tanks, and various military supplies from mainland Europe through the Siberian Railway, which made Japan suffer directly. At that time, the Soviet Union transported 60,000 tons of military supplies from its mainland to the Namihan area in August alone. There were 20,000 tons of artillery shells alone. Then, the Japanese bravery was useless and they were instantly beaten into fools. But the Japanese army's supply of arms was always poorer than China's, and the army was stronger, so the Japanese army could still show off its power in China, until the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, freed up their hands from the European battlefield and cleaned them up. Many people are bragging about the Japanese army's combat effectiveness. In fact, the Japanese invasion of China was just a fight between chickens. In this fight, because the Chinese army was poorer and lacked ammunition, the air was completely controlled by the Japanese army, so it was always suppressed. What if you are brave? Facing the repeated bombing of airplanes and artillery, no matter how brave you are, you will be beaten into a sieve. However, when it comes to the United States and the Soviet Union, which have sufficient ammunition, the Japanese army, which is already short of ammunition, was instantly beaten silly. Let's not talk about how brave the Soviet army is, just talk about the US military. The bravery of the US military is completely incomparable to that of the devil. But they have a lot of ammunition, and they use tons of artillery shells to wash the ground when attacking a small island with only dozens of people stationed. Then, all kinds of firepower continue. No matter how brave the devils are, they will have to kneel before such tactics. Therefore, railways are of great significance for colonists to control the inland or for great powers to rule distant frontiers. In fact, before the completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway, Russia's control over the Far East was actually very poor. The failure of the Russo-Japanese War proved this point. If the Qing dynasty was a strong regime at the time, it would have no problem snatching Siberia with its local advantages. But the last Qing dynasty was a piece of mud that could not be helped up, and the Tsarist Russia could scare the Qing dynasty by sending some expeditionary forces. Otherwise, it would not have easily lost outer northeast. Railways and trains are so important that Marin has arranged for Leonardo da Vinci to start developing trains that move what steam engines to carriages. But Marin knew very well that this early vertical single-bar steam engine was actually very inefficient. Just like the train invented by Stephenson in the early days, because it used the inefficient vertical single-cylinder steam engine, the train was very slow, with a speed of only a dozen or 20 kilometers per hour, and could only drag a 30-ton carriage. The later trains could carry 2,000 to 3,000 tons of cargo, which was incomparable. But Marin also knew that he had to eat one bite at a time. So, he was now asking Leonardo da Vinci to test the train system driven by what single-cylinder steam engine. When this low-speed and low-cargo train was successfully developed, he would develop a horizontal double-cylinder steam engine to improve efficiency. Once the train was successfully developed, it would be very easy for Marin to control the inland areas of North America in the future. There was no Indian tribe that could not be dealt with by a train of troops. If there was, he would send another train of troops over. Chapter 1497 Simon's Wedding. It is not an easy task to put the steam engine on the locomotive, because the volume of the carriage is limited. When designing the locomotive, the layout of the steam engine and the boiler must be taken into consideration to the extreme. Moreover, it must be easy to operate and maintain. Therefore, Leonardo da Vinci was very troubled during this period, and his hair fell a lot, almost becoming bald. Although he was already 61 years old, Marin lacked scientists and could only use Leonardo da Vinci as a mule. In order to lure Leonardo da Vinci, the scientific mule, to work hard for him, Leonardo da Vinci's 5-year-old son Picasso, a name that Marin, who had a bad taste, helped to come up with, had been canonized as a baron by Marin. Moreover, Marin made it clear that if Leonardo da Vinci had another son, his name would be Van Gogh, and he would also be given a baron in a large baronial territory. As for the reward for the train, Marin said that once the train was successfully developed, Picasso would be given a county-sized fiefdom. Leonardo da Vinci had been to North America for a long time and knew that the land there was fertile. Therefore, in order to get a county fiefdom for his son, he was desperate. During this period, he did not forget to go back and create a little man with his wife Lisa, and strive to create the Van Gogh promised by Marin, and also let Marin give him a large piece of fiefdom. So, Leonardo da Vinci is very busy now. He has to study trains, go home to create little men, and take care of the training of science students in Bahia State. He can't do anything. But Marin has no choice. He lacks scientific talents under his command, so he can only catch a sheep of Leonardo da Vinci and try to fleece him. Fortunately, the young Durer is also very interested in science. This guy is a copycat version of Leonardo da Vinci, and he still idolizes Leonardo da Vinci. Marin simply sent Durer to Leonardo da Vinci as an assistant. They are both very talented in mathematics and mechanics. The difference is that after Marin's on-demand, Leonardo da Vinci has a much deeper foundation in science. Giving Durer to Leonardo da Vinci as an assistant also means that Durer will be the successor of Leonardo da Vinci. After all, Leonardo da Vinci is 61 years old, and God knows how many years he can live. Then, Marin has already chosen the next target for exploitation, that is Mr. Durer, who is only 42 years old. At his age, he can still be exploited for more than 20 years. To be honest, according to the retirement age of 65, Durer can still be exploited for 23 years. Since Caesar learned about the importance of Leonardo da Vinci to the development of trains, he often pestered Marin to explain the principles of steam engines to him. At the same time, in order to appease Leonardo da Vinci, Caesar especially likes to bring 5-year-old Picasso to Leonardo da Vinci these days. In order to let Leonardo da Vinci do his best, Caesar took good care of Picasso and expressed to Leonardo da Vinci the attitude of, "I will protect your son in the future," which really made Leonardo da Vinci very happy. In fact, the 5-year-old Picasso was at the age of being hated by people and ghosts at this time, and he was very naughty. So, Caesar was actually taking care of the naughty Picasso with a smile on the surface and MMP in his heart. But he had understood how the monarch won over his subjects. Although he was a little impatient, he still pretended to dote on Picasso, a naughty child, making the other children who were to serve Caesar very jealous. For example, Khan's eldest son Tyson, who was also 5 years old, also named by Marin, the younger son was called Holyfield, but was only 1 year old, was so jealous that he wanted to challenge Picasso. This naughty child was as chubby as his father, and he was very strong, and he beat Picasso to tears. But Marin caught him and beat him up, and then scared him, so the child didn't dare to mess with Picasso. As for Kohler's son Kobe and Schwartz's son Rommel, you don't have to think about who helped name them. The two children were still young, only about 3 years old, and they couldn't walk steadily, so they couldn't participate in the competition among the older brothers. Hayder gave birth to a little girl, but unfortunately Caesar had already been engaged. So Hayder simply didn't send the girl to the palace. After all, since there was no chance, it was better to learn to be a lady at home, so as not to be led astray by a few naughty kids after entering the palace. You know, little girls who often play with boys can easily become tomboys. In his previous life, Marin had seen a second-rate little girl who wanted to compete with a few little boys for penises. As a result, of course, the little girl couldn't take out her penis and could only cry in grievance. Just when Marin was busy with William's affairs and the development of trains, news came from Lithuania. Simon had been to Vilnius and swore allegiance to the Lithuanian Great Sejm, Parliament, officially becoming the Ukrainian Count of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. Now that Simon has officially become a count. Then, the next step is the wedding with Princess Anna of the Lamarck family. Then, the entire Hoffman family moved to prepare for Simon's wedding. Fortunately, Marin brought back a large amount of silk and porcelain from the Ming dynasty last time. These things are not very valuable in the Ming dynasty, but they are very valuable in Europe. It is very face-saving to use these silks and porcelain as betrothal gifts. Marin even prepared a 50-meter-long red carpet for Simon for the wedding. The wedding ceremony walked on the red carpet, followed by several beautiful little girls holding up the skirt, which was very ceremonial. After Simon returned from Vilnius, the wedding entered the countdown. After discussion between the two parties, the two families rejected the previous plan to hold the wedding in Kiev, because it is not convenient for relatives and friends to attend such a far place. Therefore, the venue of the wedding was adjusted to the hometown of the Hoffman family Bochum. Bochum, as the Dragon's Rise of the Hoffman family, is relatively close to the city of Clever where the Lamarck family is located, which is very convenient for the mother's family to attend the wedding. Moreover, this place was once the territory of the Mark state ruled by the Lamarck family, which is considered half of the home court of the Lamarck family. Although Bochum is only a small city, Simon had been stationed here for a period of time before and had renovated the city lord's mansion. But Marin thought the city lord's mansion was too small and not grand enough. Therefore, an engineering team was urgently dispatched to bring back a large amount of cement, intending to use cement to build a new building. It doesn't require luxury, just make do. After all, Simon went to Ukraine after the wedding. Therefore, the newly built building looked a bit like an illegal construction, and the workmanship was a bit rough. As for the carvings that the nobles were particular about, there were none at all. Fortunately, the characteristic of cement is that it is fast to build a house. As long as the main body is built and the outside is coated with cement, it will be ready for use in a few days. Unlike the stone buildings of this era, which require a lot of manpower, stonemasons pile up finely polished stones into houses, which is very labor-intensive and time-consuming. By the end of October, in just a few months, the city lord's mansion in Bochum city was completely renewed, the area expanded 5 times, and there was a square that could accommodate thousands of people. Then, on November 11th, the singles day in later generations, Simon's wedding was officially held in the city lord's mansion in Bochum. Chapter 1498 Wedding Matters. For a Christian wedding, you naturally have to go to the church to take an oath first. Therefore, Marin and the guests have to go to the church in Bochum to attend the wedding oath ceremony. However, Bochum is a very small city, not as big as a town in China in the future. Therefore, the city lord's mansion is less than 500 meters away from the church. But for the sense of ceremony and pretending, such a short distance also requires a carriage. Moreover, it must be a golden carriage. Otherwise, the style is not high enough. In order to make the wedding more grand, the old Hoffman couple invited the son-in-law with the highest status in the family, Sigismund I, to come as the big boss of the wedding. Marin was not very satisfied with this. Mad, Simon's wedding, I originally wanted to pretend. As a result, my brother-in-law Sigismund I jumped out and stole the limelight. I really want to give this brother-in-law who is 11 years older than me a brick on the forehead, and by the way, put down a cruel word — bitch, dare to steal my limelight. Of course, this can only be thought about. Sigismund I's status is indeed higher than his own. He is the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania, and the monarch of 2 major European countries. And he is just a larger prince of the Holy Roman Empire, and there is a boss above him. So it is inevitable that he is a head shorter than him. In addition, it was the idea of the old Hoffman couple to invite this brother-in-law, and Marin couldn't say anything. In addition, the most crucial point is that Sigismund I is Simon's monarch. This is the most critical point. After all, Simon will be under the command of Sigismund I in the future, and it is only natural to invite his boss to calm the situation. In addition, as Simon's future boss, Sigismund I will publicly recognize the legitimacy of Simon, the Count, and Princess Anna, the Countess, after the wedding. This is of great political significance. Therefore, although Marin was dissatisfied with his brother-in-law stealing his limelight, he couldn't say anything. The wedding ceremony officially started at 9 o'clock in the morning. The guests gathered at the Bochum castle and were divided into several circles according to their status. They greeted each other and smiled at each other on the cement square in front of the Bochum castle. The newly renovated Bochum castle is not delicate enough and has no artistic sculptures, but it is large enough. Marin bought several houses around the castle and demolished them to get a large square that can accommodate thousands of people. Then, cement was laid on the square, and after drying, it was coated with lime, making the castle square look snow-white and very eye-catching. Of course, it also concealed the characteristics of cement. The guests who came basically didn't notice the material of the square, and thought it was so flat because it was paved with good stones. After chatting for a long time in Latin, which is common among the nobles, and drinking a few cups of steaming milk tea, at 10:40 in the morning, Sigismund I and Queen and took a golden carriage together and went to Bochum Cathedral, which was only 500 meters away. Then, it was the carriage of Marin and his wife, and the carriage of the emperor's representative. Following closely behind were the carriages of the Duke of Clever, John II, and his wife, and the carriages of the old Hoffman couple. Behind them were the carriages of a group of princes or princes' representatives. These carriages were all shock-absorbing carriages using shock-absorbing springs produced in the North Sea country, and they were all gold-plated on the outside, and they all looked very impressive. Because the church could only accommodate a limited number of people, only the princes and their representatives were qualified to go to the church to watch the ceremony. Those lower-level nobles were not qualified to squeeze into the church. There was no way. Bochum was a small city, and the church was not big. Marin could make a cement square in a short time, but he couldn't build a new cathedral. Then, the golden carriages of the groom Simon and the bride Anna also drove to the Bochum church one after another to hold the oath ceremony. The person who supported the wedding was naturally the chief bishop of the North Sea country, Taylor the Big Liar. This big liar wore a sacred robe today, with a serious face, which made Marin a little out of the play. Because, in his mind, there always appeared the image of Taylor fooling people. And the sharp contrast between Bishop Taylor's usual frivolous image and his serious face reminded Ma Lin of the priest pretended by L.V. Zichiao in the first episode of the first season of Love Apartment. You are a funny guy, but you pretend to be serious. Thinking of the scene where L.V. Zichiao fooled people with messy English, Ma Lin couldn't help laughing. To be honest, the so-called Western-style wedding of Wang Taizhu and Tian Erniu was very funny. Obviously, they have super rustic names, but they insist on having a Western-style wedding, which is a bit out of place. Just for their names, Zheng Xiaoxian's plan may be more reliable. But there is no way. The so-called modern women are so stupid. Obviously, they are all native Chinese, and they obviously don't believe in God, but they stupidly find a priest to pretend to have a Western-style wedding and swear to God. Well, even if there is really a God, I guess he will be confused. You two don't believe in me, what's the point of swearing to me? Unfortunately, there are so many Chinese fools in later generations, especially female fools who like romance. Therefore, the real priest who had diarrhea after eating L.V. Zichiao's powerful pills couldn't help but complain there are too many new people, fools, who asked me to preside over the wedding, and they ate and drank a lot every meal, which made the old man's stomach upset. Of course, Marin is too steely and straight, and doesn't know how to follow those female fools. Therefore, he deserved to be single in his previous life, and he was single by strength. For example, in his previous life, Marin met a brainless fangirl of Kai Guankuan, a combination of Kai and Xie Guankuan, who shouted, "Protect the best Kunkan," all day long. As a result, Marin pointed out frankly that Kunkan is a sissy. Then, he was blocked. In fact, if he was a little more cunning and followed it, then such a stupid girl might be deceived. Of course, those were all stupid things in his previous life. In this life, Marin is in Western Europe in the 16th century. Here, getting married in a church is normal and necessary. There is absolutely no such stupid thing as a non-Christian swearing an oath to God for marriage. Although Bishop Taylor is a big liar, his professional quality is still first class. Under his auspices, Simon took over Princess Anna's hand from John II and completed the wedding oath. During the oath, Marin specially sent a military band to play the Wedding March in the church, which is Wagner's Wedding Cantata. Compared with Mendelssohn's Wedding March, Wagner's version of Wedding March is more solemn and melodious, and has a higher level of style, which is very suitable for playing in the atmosphere of the church. Because the music is too classic, after the oath, many people asked what song it was. But of course they couldn't find out, because this was plagiarized by Marin from later generations. However, after this wedding, the weddings of European royal families began to popularize the Wedding March composed by Grand Duke Marin at the wedding ceremony. After the oath, the couple took the same carriage and returned to the Bochum castle. However, they did not go back directly on the straight road, but first went around the city a few times to accept the cheers of the people. However, the population of Bochum city is too small, with only 2,000 or 3,000 ordinary residents. Even if all the people in the city come out to cheer, it is impossible to create a warm atmosphere. Therefore, the army under Marin's command naturally needs to be on the scene as a shill. When the Simon couple's golden carriage paraded around the city, the streets were filled with soldiers from the North Sea Kingdom in civilian clothes, cheering and shouting in a uniform voice, fully creating the illusion that the Simon couple was loved by the people. When the Simon couple's golden carriage ended the parade and returned to the city lord's mansion, the soldiers who acted as civilians on the street also left at the call of the group leader. At this time, it was already past 12 noon. The group leaders shouted, "Everyone line up to get the box lunch, and each person will get an extra chicken leg at noon today. Long live The cheers of the soldiers at this time were extremely sincere and warm. Then, there was a banquet at the city lord's mansion. At the banquet, Sigismund I, as Simon's future monarch, blessed the newlyweds in public, and on behalf of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, recognized the legal status of Simon and his wife as princes. For a time, there was thunderous applause. Then, everyone started eating. During dinner in the evening, fireworks introduced from the Ming dynasty were set off outside the Bochum city lord's mansion, which opened the eyes of the guests and amazed them. Of course, everyone also asked about the origin of the fireworks. In this regard, Marin did not hide his private knowledge and directly made the fireworks technology public. After all, gunpowder is so expensive these days that only nobles can afford fireworks. Marin does not expect to make money from this, so he might as well use this technology as a favor. Of course, Marin did not make public the technology of double bang and triple bang firecrackers, which are the military signal transmission methods of the North Sea Kingdom. This is a core military secret. If someone learns it, it will affect military security. Therefore, he only disclosed the manufacturing technology of a single firework. With the end of the fireworks and the end of the dinner, this grand wedding finally came to an end. Chapter 1499, The Winged Knights. Simon's wedding was over, and Simon took his new wife to the distant Kiev, Ukraine to be his own prince. However, the aftermath of his wedding was still unabated and spread throughout Western Europe. This wedding was hailed as the wedding of the century by the guests who attended. In fact, the wedding march made by Marin and the fireworks show at night were too classic. Of course, the fine wine and food at the wedding banquet are also worth bragging about. Even Angela, who had just finished her confinement and came to attend her brother-in-law's wedding, was jealous and kept questioning Marin, why was our wedding not so classic and romantic? Marin was speechless. Was I poor at the time? Moreover, at that time, I didn't think of copying the wedding march. After all, he didn't have a military band at that time. As for fireworks, Marin still introduced them from the Ming dynasty. And when he married Angela, he hadn't contacted the Ming dynasty yet. Even if he wanted fireworks, he couldn't make them. However, Marin's move this time did set a new benchmark for European royal weddings. If there is no wedding march and fireworks at the wedding in the future, it is embarrassing to say that you are a noble. But the old Hoffman couple were very satisfied with the wedding and felt very proud. Originally, a knight who was a hanger-on counterattacked and let his son marry the princess of the original master's family, which was considered very face-saving. And the wedding of the century, planned by Marin himself, made the Hoffman family even more famous in the circle of nobles. Therefore, for a long time afterwards, old Hoffman was kind to Marin and could not see the essence of the irritable old man at all. The Lamarck family also had face. After all, marrying a daughter also requires face. The more grand and majestic the daughter's wedding is, the more face the Lamarck family who married her daughter will have. As for the heroine of the wedding, Princess Anna, she was completely impressed by this romantic and generous wedding. In front of love and romance, the 18-year-old Princess Anna fell directly, and her IQ dropped to negative numbers. Then, she was willing to be manipulated by the wretched uncle and old driver Simon. Of course, Simon had obtained a legal marriage certificate, so it was not a mess. After learning about Simon's happy life, Marin was speechless. No wonder Mr. Liang Qichao said, "A strong youth means a strong country, and a wise youth means a wise country." Feelings, girls of the same age as boys, can't be counted on at all. It's not that women are not as smart as men, but that in the young stage, girls who are just beginning to fall in love often lose their minds and are completely useless when it comes to love. Only after being deceived a few more times will you really wake up and restore your original IQ. It is said that men are animals who think with their lower body, and women are more emotional. But Marin knows very well that although men are used to solving problems with their lower body, their brains are not affected. Once you are done or masturbate, you can regain your sanity after entering the sage time. Women are different. When they fall in love, they use their brains to think, which is fatal. Because, after the lower body of a man softens, he will regain his sanity. Once a woman falls in love, she will lose her mind for a long time, even for many years. Only when the woman no longer believes in love will her IQ be back online. Therefore, even in the 21st century, it is difficult for men and women to be truly equal. Unless women no longer believe in love and their IQs are not lowered, they will have the ability and capital to be equal to men. But because of the poisoning of those brain-dead idol dramas in later generations, especially the advocacy of poor Sheikh, an outstanding representative of mistresses, most middle-aged women in later generations have long-term IQs that are not online, which makes people very helpless. The most precious time in life is the prime of life, but women in later generations believe in love that lowers IQs during this period. In this case, if men and women are really equal, it would be strange. Of course, even if Ma Lin travels back in time, he dare not say these words, and can only think about them in his heart. Didn't you see that Mr. Yu Minhong stood up and said a few words, and was sprayed like a dog? What's funny is that the person who stood up to diss him was actually a tiger who got up and chopped her husband with a kitchen knife, and was praised by the society. Of course, Mr. Yu's words were indeed inappropriate. For example, what he said was too general and the scope of attack was too wide, so it was normal for the crowd to laugh at him. If he added a some in his words, it would be reasonable. Because once some is said, it would be difficult for someone to jump out, and whoever jumps out would be the one who identified himself. But Lao Yu directly fired a map cannon, and the whole audience laughed at him, and brought all women into it. It would be strange if he didn't get criticized, and he deserved it. Because the fallen women he said only exist among young people, and not all of them are like this. Simon was on his way to Kiev with his new wife, together with Sigismund INN. After all, this was a matter of convenience. Halfway through the journey, Simon did not forget Marin's instructions, and talked to his brother-in-law Sigismund I about recruiting winged cavalry in Poland and Lithuania. Now, Sigismund I has formed a winged cavalry team of several thousand people, training day and night. The only thing missing is that the Polish winged hussars have not been tested in actual combat. However, it is said that there is some friction on the border between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Grand Duchy of Moscow. Sigismund I has been secretly promoting this matter recently, hoping to cause a conflict between the two sides. Then, he will send out the winged hussars to fight and test the combat effectiveness of this new type of cavalry. After all, the winged hussars have not yet proved their strength. But Marin has no doubt about the combat effectiveness of the winged hussars, because this has been tested by history. Originally in history, after Poland produced the winged hussars, it suddenly got rid of its original decline against the Grand Duchy of Moscow, began to suppress the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and even captured Moscow. It was not until the Russians had Peter I, the hero, that they got rid of the decline and pushed back. Of course, the decline of Poland is not the credit of Peter I alone. Because, before Peter I, there was also Gustav II, a perverted boss, who started to use Gustav line array to beat Poland decades earlier than Peter I. It can be said that Poland began to decline under the joint suppression of the newly rising Sweden and the later Russians. But in the final analysis, there are problems with the political systems of Poland and Lithuania. Because Poland and Lithuania have always been aristocratic parliamentary systems, the king has no real power at all and is unable to concentrate the country's resources to compete with two powerful enemies. If it were replaced by a centralized dynastic system like France, with the strength of Poland and Lithuania, Sweden and the Russians would have been dealt with before the rise of the second Master Gu. But for Marin, such waves and Lithuania are what he can rest assured about, and they are also the most suitable allies. And what Simon talked about with Sigismund I was to borrow a group of officers from the Polish winged hussars to help him train a winged cavalry. The name has been chosen, it is called the Winged Knights, and the Grand Commander is naturally Simon. And this Winged Knights, mainly composed of cavalry, Marin intends to use it as an important reinforcement in the future. Chapter 1500, the Knights are officially established. The Knights of Poland and Lithuania are unfortunate. Because of the hostile relationship between the two countries and the Teutonic Knights, the wandering knights of the two countries cannot go to the two nearby knight groups, the Teutonic Knights or the Livonian Knights. Not only that, because of the close relationship between the Teutonic Knights and the German region, it is not easy for the wandering knights of Poland and Lithuania to find jobs in the German region. Moreover, there are too many wandering knights in the German region itself, and the competition is very fierce. As for places outside Germany, the possibility is also very low. The Grand Duchy of Moscow in the east is an Orthodox country, which conflicts with the Catholic faith of Poland and Lithuania. Not to mention Turkey in the south, it is a pagan. Therefore, the wandering knights of Poland and Lithuania can only choose to mix in the country. Or, go to the Kingdom of Bohemia, which is also ruled by the Jagiellonian royal family. But whether it is Poland and Lithuania, or Bohemia, they do not have a great demand for knights. Germany is different. Germany is a fragmented place with many principalities. For the sake of hegemony and security, each prince would recruit a group of knights to protect the security of the princely state. In Poland, Lithuania and Bohemia, although the nobles were also independent, there was no struggle for hegemony among the princes, so there was not much demand for wandering knights. In this way, the options left for Polish wandering knights were very small. And serving the royal family became a very important way. It was also because of this that Sigismund I, the King of Poland, could easily pull up a team and form a large-scale winged cavalry in history. In fact, there was no other way out for the knights in the country. If the wandering knights wanted to get the title and fiefdom, they could only serve the king or the great nobles. But Poland and Lithuania were nominally unified countries, and there was no need for hegemony among the princes like in Germany. Therefore, there were many unemployed wandering knights in Poland. In order to find opportunities to make meritorious deeds, they had to join the king's army. Therefore, although the monarchs of Poland and Lithuania had no real power, they actually had no shortage of wandering knights willing to serve them. However, because the monarch's own financial resources are limited, the scale of the winged cavalry has always been maintained at a scale of several thousand to more than 10,000 people. It's not that there are no people to recruit, but there is no money to support so many people. Marin has estimated that there are many children of knight families in Poland and Lithuania who can't find opportunities, at least tens of thousands, or even more than 20,000. Historically, the winged cavalry was formed by the Kingdom of Poland. This is not because only Poland has so many knights, but because Poland is richer. As for Lithuania, there are many knights, but there is no money to form a large-scale winged cavalry. Therefore, the winged cavalry is also called the Polish winged cavalry. And now Marin puts Simon in Ukraine, provides enough money and food, and lets him recruit wandering knights from Poland and Lithuania. It is estimated that many people will be recruited. Moreover, Marin's heart is not black, as long as a few thousand winged cavalry is enough. This will be a trump card in his hand during the future religious war, which can cooperate with him to launch an attack from the east of Germany to the homeland. As long as it is used well, a legion of 10,000 people including thousands of winged cavalry can destroy many German principalities. When they are free, these winged cavalry can also help them mobilize or capture local Cossacks on the Ukrainian steppes, forcing them to immigrate to the North Sea Kingdom or serve them. No matter how fierce the Cossacks are, they can't beat the Polish winged cavalry with enough people. After all, the Cossacks are pure light cavalry, while the winged cavalry are semi-heavy cavalry. In addition, they have been practicing martial arts since childhood, and their combat effectiveness is much stronger than that of the Cossacks. As for the title of Winged Knights, it's just a name that Marin thought of casually. After all, recruiting wandering knights requires a signboard. The name of a knight's order is very attractive and justified. It would be strange if Simon dared to recruit publicly as an earl without being suspected by the nobles of the Principality of Lithuania. You are a small earl, why do you need so many wandering knights? Want to rebel? And it is justified to create a knight's order to recruit wandering knights. After all, the knight's order is to recruit many wandering knights. As for the need for the approval of the Church to establish the Knights' Order, this is not a problem at all. No, Marin wrote a letter to his father-in-law Julius II, and then the Vatican issued an edict allowing the establishment of the Winged Knights. Then, without a single wandering knight coming to join him, Simon became the Grand Master of this empty knightly order. Moreover, in the edict allowing the establishment of the Winged Knights, Julius II also gave a very reasonable excuse: Ukraine is located on the Catholic front line, facing challenges from the Orthodox Church in the east and the Green Church in the south, and is a very important place. Simon stationed the Winged Knights in Ukraine to protect Christian civilization, and also as a barrier to the Catholic world. Look, how great! Simon's negotiations with Sigismund I went smoothly, because Marin had already talked to Sigismund I. Sigismund I naturally had a good idea about Simon's request. At first, Sigismund I was against Simon recruiting thousands of wandering knights from Poland and Lithuania. After all, no monarch wants to have such a powerful army under his command. But Marin explained to him that these were soldiers and horses that he had secretly hidden. Moreover, Simon could not afford to support so many soldiers and horses. Sigismund I agreed. After all, Marin's North Sea Kingdom posed no threat to Poland. On the contrary, the North Sea Kingdom needed Poland as an ally. Because Sigismund I also knew that the newly promoted Hoffman family was relatively excluded and hostile among the German princes, and it was normal for Marin to hide some soldiers and horses abroad. With the foundation of the previous talk with Marin, it was naturally not a problem for Simon to communicate. Sigismund I readily agreed to Simon's request to form a knightly order, and agreed to send dozens of winged cavalry officers to help Simon train winged cavalry. After the team arrived in Krakow, the capital of the Kingdom of Poland, Sigismund I did not get off the car, but asked some winged cavalry to protect and back to the palace. As for himself, he accompanied Simon to Kiev to attend the founding ceremony of Simon's Winged Knights. In addition to the monarch Sigismund I, many dignitaries and parliamentarians of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania also showed up to support the event. Then, a team came from the west. They were envoys from the Holy See who read the Pope's decree. After the envoys from the Holy See read the decree of Julius II in public in the square in front of the royal palace in Kiev, Sigismund I, as the Grand Duke of Lithuania, publicly announced his agreement with Simon to form the Knights Templar. Of course, Simon, the new Grand Master of the Knights, also swore in public on the Bible that he would never lead his troops north to interfere in the internal affairs of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania without the permission of the Grand Duke of Lithuania and the Lithuanian Sejm. After Simon swore that he would not lead his troops to interfere in the internal affairs of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, several members of the Lithuanian Sejm who were present were obviously relieved. They were also afraid that Simon would rely on force to fight for the right to speak in Lithuania. After the Winged Knights were officially established, Simon, the lone Grand Master, immediately sent people to various parts of Lithuania and Poland to carry out propaganda and recruit children of knight families who could not find opportunities to serve as members of the Knights. Chapter 1501, Sending Troops to Ireland. Unlike the three major knightly orders, Hospital Knights, Templar Knights and Teutonic Knights, previously established by the Holy See, the Winged Knights are a secular knightly order. The three previous knightly orders were strictly speaking a group of armed monks. All the successive Grand Masters had to be single and unmarried monks. The Winged Knights formed by Simon are strictly speaking a secular knightly order. Logically, they are not qualified to be recognized by the Holy See. For example, the Garter Knights of England and the Golden Fleece Knights of Burgundy have not been recognized by the Holy See. But this is no problem for Marin. After all, his father-in-law is the Pope. Moreover, Simon's territory is indeed located at the easternmost part of the Catholic area. It is said that the army formed by Simon is a barrier to the Catholic world, and no one can say anything. After all, this is also a fact. So, strictly speaking, the Winged Knights are just a secular knightly order recognized by the Holy See. But because of the recognition of the Holy See, it is a little more dazzling than ordinary secular knights. After all, in this era when Protestantism has not yet risen, the name of the Holy See is still very loud. With the recognition of the Holy See, although the Winged Knights cannot catch up with the reputation of the three major knights, their reputation among the people is definitely very high. In this way, the people sent by Simon were much smoother when recruiting wandering knights. After all, the knights are formal knights recognized by the Pope. To put it bluntly, Simon is too unknown. If Simon is allowed to take the lead in forming the knights, no one will come. After all, Simon is currently unknown. Only by holding on to the thick thigh of the Holy See and asking the Holy See to help promote it, can people come to join. As expected by Marin, after being publicly recognized by the Holy See, wow, the Winged Knights became famous. Then, when Simon promoted recruitment in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and Poland, many people actively came to apply. Simon first selected 1,000 young and strong ones, and gathered them together to be trained by dozens of Polish winged cavalry instructors sent by Sigismund I. Simon himself ran back to make a villain with Princess Anna. As for the rest of the people, Simon's men will slowly recruit them. After all, in this era of communication basically relies on shouting, the transmission of information is too slow. If you really want to recruit thousands of people, it will probably take a long time. After all, in this era, many knights live in the countryside, and transportation and message transmission are very inconvenient. If you want to recruit them, you have to wait for the announcement to be posted in the countryside. Besides, Marin estimated that it would take several years for the religious war to break out, and the knights did not need to be so anxious, and they could recruit people while training. Considering that the religious war will take a long time to break out, Marin asked to try to find younger wandering knights. In this way, when the religious war really breaks out, this group of knights will not look too old, and they will be in their prime. And just when Simon was busy recruiting people, Marin also received a letter from King Edward of England in Oric. England was already preparing to attack Ireland. In fact, as early as the summer, Edward was persuaded by Marin to start preparing to use force against Ireland. However, Edward did not have enough food and grass for tens of thousands of horses, and he had no money to buy food from Marin. Therefore, we can only wait until the autumn harvest is over to collect a batch of new grain as food for tens of thousands of troops. Now, the autumn harvest has long passed, and Edward has also carried out a nationwide grain collection in the country. When Marin received Edward's letter, Edward's food and grass were almost ready. This is also a common problem of European monarchs in this era. The war preparation period is long. There is no way. At this time in Europe, except for Marin's cheating, the grain output is high and there has never been a shortage of food. The monarchs of other countries are all food deficient. Often to fight a war, the monarchs of European countries need to collect grain nationwide. Otherwise, it is simply not enough to gather the food needed for tens of thousands of troops. Therefore, the wars in Europe in recent years are often on a scale of only 10,000 to 20,000 people. If there are more people, it will be difficult for the monarchs to afford military expenses and food. Although Marin has a lot of food, he will not act as a sucker and provide Edward with food for free. After all, this doesn't make sense. If you are too enthusiastic and take the initiative to pay, it may arouse Edward's suspicion. Therefore, Marin could only watch coldly, watching Edward plunder food from all over the country in the name of levying war taxes during the autumn harvest. England's enclosure movement was still in its early stages at this time, and the nobles were only enclosing public land, and had not yet developed to the stage of large-scale enclosing of small tenants and self-employed farmers' arable land. Therefore, England's grain production is still okay now. After an autumn harvest, Edward barely managed to get together the military rations. According to the previous agreement, Edward will lead 10,000 of England's most elite guards, plus 10,000 of the 6th Legion promised by Marin, and 5,000 soldiers and horses of the 4th Legion, a total of 25,000 people, to attack the island of Ireland. Moreover, Edward will personally lead the army to unify the entire island of Ireland. Marin's words last time reminded him that if he completely unified the island of Ireland this time, he would become the first monarch in British history to completely unify the island of Britain and the island of Ireland. Even if he died, he could earn the title of the Great Emperor. Therefore, Edward naturally needed to go to the island of Ireland to brush his face in person this time. Although you don't need to lead the troops, you also need to maintain a sufficient sense of presence. In this way, you can take all the historical achievements on your own head. In fact, at this time in Ireland, the indigenous forces generally did not have a total force of more than 5,000. Even if the forces were added together, there were only more than 10,000 people. Including the militia composed of the people, there might be tens of thousands of people. After all, at this time, the entire island of Ireland had only about 250,000 people. Therefore, this time Edward led an army of 25,000 to attack, and the possibility of failure was very low. Originally in history, Elizabeth I mobilized 17,000 troops and fought for 9 years because the Irish resistance army received support from Spain at sea at that time. Spain had previously lost to England in the Invincible Fleet, and was resentful, so it strongly supported the Irish to find trouble with England, which made England spend so much power to suppress it. But now, whether it is Spain or France, the two major powers that have the ability to support the local forces in Ireland, they have started fighting in Italy first and have no energy to support the local forces in Ireland. Therefore, at this time, attacking Ireland, the local indigenous forces cannot get strong help. Even, Marin felt that it was okay to divide the army into several groups this time. After all, the military strength of the indigenous forces was so weak. However, both Marin and Edward knew one thing: the resistance forces on the island, in addition to the indigenous people, might also be the earls left over from the Norman conquest. Don't look at the four forces of Desmond, Ormond, Ulster and Wexford Autonomous Region, which nominally surrendered to the English royal family. However, who knows whether these four forces are really loyal to England? These people have been local tyrants on the island of Ireland for too long, and have long regarded the island of Ireland as their own territory. Maybe they will feel offended by England's reaching out. After all, England has not taken Ireland seriously for hundreds of years. At this time, England suddenly sent a large army to the island of Ireland, and these four princes may not really welcome it. If you are not careful, you may be stabbed in the back by these four princes. Therefore, Marin and Edward both felt that it was better to be cautious, so as not to capsize in the gutter. In addition to being careful of the resistance of the natives, you must also pay attention to the movements of the four princes, so as not to be tricked by them. According to the original plan, Edward will go to war with 10,000 guards. And Marin's 4th Legion in England will send 5,000 soldiers to accompany him. They will first arrive at the west coast of England, and then board the ship to land in Dublin. Marin will send the 6th Legion, which is mainly composed of Scottish Highlanders, from the mainland to Dublin to join Edward. After receiving Edward's letter, Marin found Hanks, the commander of the 6th Legion, and asked him to prepare to take the army to Emden Port, prepare to board the ship, go to Ireland, and join Edward and his party. Then, launch an attack on the indigenous forces on the island of Ireland. Chapter 1502 Artillery Battalion. Before Christmas, Hanks and his 6th Corps arrived in Dublin with the full transport of the North Sea ships and warships. On the other hand, England was still in the process of transportation because it needed to transport 15,000 combat troops and 20,000 civilians. Marin also came to Dublin with the fleet, but he did not intend to participate in the war, but just came to show his support at the beginning. Moreover, Edward did not want him to participate in the war. After all, the unification of Ireland is a very politically significant thing. Edward wants to be an emperor of the ages, so he naturally does not want others to steal the limelight. Therefore, Marin just came to Dublin to show his support for Edward. Then, he had to go back. However, Marin sent an artillery battalion to facilitate Edward's siege. The artillery battalion sent by Marin has 18 guns and 300 artillerymen. In fact, 180 artillerymen are enough to operate the artillery. The other 120 people are the reserve troops and coolies who carry shells. The artillery on land is different from the artillery on warships. Warships can be equipped with enough shells and gunpowder, and each gun only needs a few people to serve. The artillery on land is more troublesome. Because the army artillery needs to be disassembled and installed. When you arrive at the location, you have to dig a pit and make an easy-to-reset gun position or something. Moreover, through the war in Italy, Marin discovered that artillery can be protected by earth mounds. Gonzalo de Córdoba is a tactician who is good at earthwork. He likes to dig earth in front of the army to form earth walls to block enemy shells. The Spanish musketeers can calmly abuse their opponents with muskets by hiding behind the earth mounds. In fact, this trick is very useful even in later wars. In the anti-Japanese movies that Marin watched, soldiers often hid behind the crude fortifications made of sacks filled with soil and shot at the enemy. In particular, this scene is very common in street battles. Of course, this defense method is also limited. If the opponent only uses guns, it is indeed difficult to break through such defenses. But if the opponent uses artillery. With the artillery level of World War II, this simple street fortification can definitely be taken down with one shot. Therefore, this kind of fortification filled with sacks filled with mud and sand is only suitable for chickens to peck each other. No one has artillery, come on, hurt each other. But when you encounter the devils with 92 infantry guns, you can't stop it. At that time, during the Civil War, everyone used hanyang, and you could rely on the mounds to shoot at the enemy for a long time without a winner. But when you encounter opponents with airplanes and cannons, just GG. Of course, later our army realized the huge gap in firepower and simply changed to night attacks. This time, the enemy was dumbfounded and my artillery can't play its strength in the middle of the night. Even if there are flares, if the opponent is familiar with the characteristics of flares and hides them well, the devils can't do anything. Putting aside those extra ideas, Marin found that in this era, because it is very difficult to transport artillery on land, generally only some small caliber artillery can be transported. This kind of artillery, the general shells are only 3 pounds at most, and they can't penetrate the mounds at all. Do you know why Turkey always attacks the Austrian capital Vienna first every time it attacks the German region? It's not that the Turks are stubborn, but because Vienna is on the Danube River, which is convenient for transporting cannons by ships on the Danube. The Ottoman Empire has artillery with a large caliber. However, those large caliber artillery are not suitable for land marching and transportation. Because Vienna is located on the Danube River, the Ottoman Empire army can transport heavy artillery to the edge of Vienna by ship through the estuary of the Black Sea coast of the Danube, and then pull it ashore to bombard the city of Vienna. Therefore, the Ottoman Turkish army was very stubborn and besieged Vienna again and again, and did not choose other breakthrough directions. Of course, there are also political reasons that Vienna is the nominal capital of the Holy Roman Empire. After all, taking down the nominal capital of the Holy Roman Empire can disintegrate the confidence of the Germans. However, Marin's artillery is different. He had long made a gun carriage with 2 wheels in later generations through memory, which can facilitate the transportation of artillery. In particular, he also made a simple caged ball wheel bearing, which greatly reduced the resistance of the warhorse towing the artillery, so that the artillery with a body weight of less than 1 ton could be pulled by horses on the dirt road. And this time he sent 18 artillery, 10 of which were 12-pound Napoleon cannons, cast in bronze. This kind of artillery is mainly used to destroy the enemy's battle formation. The 12-pound iron ball shells fly over, and the cannons fire a line, which can smash through the entire company column at a distance of 600 yards, with great power. As for the other 8 guns, they are even more powerful. They are 8 32-pound Karen naval guns of the army version. Don't look at the large caliber of this kind of artillery, but because of the short barrel design, its body weight is only about 800 kilograms, not much heavier than the Napoleon cannon. If only 8 guns are carried, as long as there is enough manpower, transportation can still be done. Of course, the premise is not to encounter rainy days. If it rains, the dirt road is muddy, and it is definitely impossible to transport such heavy artillery. Unless there is a Roman road paved with stones. But Ireland has been a foreign land for thousands of years, and the Roman Empire has never conquered it. Therefore, there is no Roman road in the indigenous controlled area here. Therefore, if you want to transport artillery, you can only wait for good weather. Fortunately, the island of Ireland is so big that even if you wait for a few days, the artillery can still be transported. The indigenous forces in Ireland are generally very poor, and the cities they built are all shabby small towns. Marin took out this 32-pound Carron cannon, which is definitely enough to blow open the city gate. But considering that there are too many rainy days on the island of Ireland, even in winter. Therefore, Marin also specially equipped the artillery with a huge awning to facilitate firing on rainy days. As for the gunpowder of the artillery getting damp, it does not exist. Because the propellant of the artillery of the North Sea Kingdom is all sealed with waterproof oil paper bags. Only before firing, the seal will be torn open and loaded. Even on rainy days, as long as the assembled awning is built, it can be fired. As for the awning being damaged by enemy artillery, it doesn't exist, because the Irish natives of this era didn't have artillery. After learning the earthwork technology of Gonzalo de Córdoba, Marin discovered that when digging trenches before the war, it was entirely possible to put the excavated soil into sacks, and then pile them in front of the artillery, leaving only the gap designed for the gun barrel to face outward. In this way, with the cover of fortifications made of sacks filled with soil, the safety of the gunners has been greatly improved. You know, artillery is a technical job in this era, and it is a huge loss to be killed. Therefore, with the cover of fortifications made of sacks filled with soil, the artillery losses of the North Sea Kingdom will be greatly reduced in the future. What? Are you worried that the opponent's artillery will do the same? Don't be afraid. Because the opponent's pile of soil can't stop the bombardment of the 32-pound cannon. Not to mention the bombardment of the iron ball of the 32-pound Carron cannon, even the 12-pound shells of the Napoleon cannon are difficult to resist with ordinary soil piles. Only the shells from the small 2- and 3-pound cannons were blocked by the mounds of earth. Chapter 1503 UFO Hat and Helmet. The opponent's mud pile can't stop the bombardment of our heavyweight shells, but our mud pile can stop the bombardment of the opponent's 2 or 3 pounds of small shells. No matter how you count it, it's a crushing defeat. Marin suddenly felt that the wisdom of the ancients should not be underestimated. For example, Gonzalo de Córdoba is a real hero among the natives of this era. Originally, the famous Spanish phalanx was invented by him. However, after Marin traveled through time, he didn't dare to create it himself, and named it Marin Phalanx. But Gonzalo de Córdoba still has real skills. For example, the earth wall he made easily blocked the French army's small-caliber infantry artillery, making the French army's artillery array that crushed the English longbowmen lose its power. The French army has hundreds of artillery pieces, but they are all small-caliber infantry artillery of 1 or 2 pounds. Facing the English longbowmen who only had oblique wooden stakes for defense, the French artillery was so powerful that it blasted the longbowmen that England had cultivated for more than 10 years to pieces, establishing its position as the overlord of the European continent. But Gonzalo de Córdoba directly dug trenches and piled up earth walls, which directly eliminated the advantages of the French hundreds of small-caliber artillery. The Spanish musketeers, on the other hand, were able to hide comfortably behind the earth walls and shoot at the French knights who rushed up. However, this cannot be blamed on Marin. Strictly speaking, Marin was just an ordinary person in his later life, but he often visited military forums. All his tactical ideas were learned from the great military strategists in history. So, he was actually just a copycat king. For example, this phalanx was copied from Gonzalo de Córdoba. Moreover, it was not completely copied. Because he lost Gonzalo de Córdoba's earthwork technology. The reason for this is that Marin's later thinking is at work. According to Marin's later memories, ordinary earth piles were okay for dealing with bullets. Facing artillery, even the most rubbish small cannons in later generations could not stop it. But he forgot that the artillery used in Europe at this time was extremely weak. For example, the French light artillery had a range of only 200 or 300 meters. In later generations, any small-caliber artillery had a range of several thousand meters, which was simply incomparable. Therefore, he made a wrong judgment and thought that earth piles could not stop artillery. But Gonzalo de Córdoba told him with facts that in this era, earth piles could also stop artillery shells. Fortunately, Marin was not a paranoid person and was willing to learn from others' strengths. As a result, the artillery force of the North Sea Kingdom expanded in size. For example, the original establishment of this artillery battalion was 180 people, serving 18 cannons. But Marin added 120 people. In addition to helping transport artillery shells, these additional personnel also had the responsibility of helping dig pits and pile up earth piles. In this way, if there is a battle with the enemy in the future, the loss of the artillery of the North Sea Kingdom will not be very large. Seeing the 18 cannons lined up in a row, King Edward of England was very envious. He ran to the cannon, touched it with his hands, knocked it, and his eyes were full of envy. How much copper does such a big cannon cost? He didn't see that those 32-pound Charon cannons were all made of steel, because Marin had people paint the surface and muzzle of the cannon with gold paint. It looks like a copper cannon. Of course, no one would think it was a gold cannon. Looking at Edward with envy on his face, Marin laughed and said, "Not much copper, a cannon only took 1,000 or a few hundred pounds, a few hundred kilograms. This is very pretentious, because the price of copper in Europe in this era is very expensive. The price ratio of silver to copper is 1 to 15, that is, the value of a cannon is equivalent to hundreds of pounds of silver." After hearing what Marin said, Edward smacked his lips. He didn't have that much money, but in order to maintain the 20,000 troops in London, he was short of money. Where could he get the money to buy copper cannons? So, he could only envy. Fortunately, Marin was his nominal vassal and was willing to send out cannons to fight for him. Because the 20,000 militiamen had not been shipped here yet, the army in Dublin was a little bored now. Edward simply asked the army to start practicing tactics to prepare for the upcoming battle. But Ireland is a rainy country, with rainy season all year round. Even though Dublin is on the east coast, it rained in the middle of winter, which brought great inconvenience to the army's exercises. For example, when the English knights were practicing the charge, they were blinded by the rain halfway through the charge because of the rain. In one exercise, 2 knights collided directly with each other, and both fell off their horses and were injured. "What's going on?" Edward asked in a bad tone. The officer in charge of the investigation said helplessly, "It's raining too hard, I can't open my eyes." Marin agreed. In the future, when he rode an electric bicycle, he encountered heavy rain. If he didn't have a helmet with goggles, he couldn't open his eyes. In particular, during the charge, the eyes are hit the most by the rain, making it impossible to open your eyes. At present, the helmets of European knights are all bucket helmets. The mask can move up and down. Normally, the mask is stuck on the top of the helmet. Before the battle, the knights will pull down the mask to protect their faces, and then charge. But no matter what, the mask will not block the eyes. Otherwise, the knight will become blind. But the eyes are exposed to the outside. Once they charge, they will definitely be hit by the rain and can't open their eyes when it rains. What should I do? Edward sighed. If it were in other parts of Europe, the worst-case scenario would be to stop the war on rainy days and wait for sunny days. But in Ireland, it rains 12 months a year. If you really see it raining, stop and wait, unless you don't want to fight anymore. Marin, can you help me think of a solution? Edward could only count on Marin, the nominal subordinate who was cunning. Moreover, Marin had never let him down. Let me think about it. Marin fell into deep thought. Marin first thought of the bamboo hat commonly used in the south of China in later generations. This large hat woven with bamboo strips can prevent rain. Moreover, because the brim is large, the eyes of people wearing bamboo hats will not be disturbed by rain, thus affecting vision. But Marin quickly ruled out the bamboo hat, because he couldn't let those English knights wear bamboo hats. After all, bamboo hats have no protective power, and those knights who cherish their lives will definitely not be willing to wear them. As for wearing a bamboo hat on a bucket helmet, this is feasible. However, once the battle is fierce, the knights charge, and the bamboo hat on the bucket helmet is very easy to fall off. In this way, the knight's vision will be affected by the rain again. Unless, add a brim to the knight's bucket helmet. Thinking of this, a kind of hat suddenly popped up in Marin's mind, a flying saucer hat. At the same time, I also remembered a director named Lee, who was called the Flying Saucer Hat Director. The legendary director Lee Rengang seemed to have an unusual preference for flying saucer hats. It's okay for you to use a flying saucer hat in genie way. After all, during the Yuan and Ming dynasties, flying saucer hats were indeed very commonly used helmets in the army. But what does it mean that Three Kingdoms, Resurrection of the Dragon, which is set in the Three Kingdoms, and The Great Wall, which is set in the Western Han Dynasty, all use flying saucer hats? Did the history teacher die early or let the physical education teacher take over the class? You know, the flying saucer hat only appeared in the Yuan Dynasty. However, despite the complaints, Marin knew that this kind of flying saucer hat was really beneficial for fighting in rainy days. With a wide brim, rain can't easily attack the knight's eyes. So, Marin quickly asked the military blacksmiths in the British Army in Dublin to make a few flying saucer hats and gave them to the English knights for trial. However, those knights refused to use the flying saucer hats. The reason is simple: it is not easy to install the mask on the flying saucer hat. The helmets of the plate knights all have movable masks. Usually, the mask is pulled up to the top of the head to expose the face. The mask will only be pulled down during combat. But the wide brim of the flying saucer hat makes it impossible to pull the mask up or down. In this way, the knights' faces are very dangerous in war. Therefore, the knights refuse to use this flying saucer helmet that cannot be installed with a mask. The feedback was fed back to Marin, and Marin slapped his head and said, "Hey, what's my problem? This is simple, look at my modification." Then, Marin only knew how to modify the blacksmith and change the mask to a mask that can be pulled down. This design is a design that Marin referred to in the game World of Warcraft in his previous life. When he was playing 8.0, he saw that the guards of the island nation of Kultiras all wore this kind of flying saucer hat with a mask that could be pulled down. The prototype of the kingdom of Kultiras in the game is actually England. Because England is similar to the kingdom of Kultiras in the game, both are rainy and cloudy countries. In such a rainy area, a flying saucer-shaped helmet with a pull-down mask is indeed very suitable. Soon, this flying saucer hat helmet with a pull-down mask was produced and sent to the English knights for trial. In fact, England also had a flying saucer-shaped helmet at this time. However, because no one thought of using a pull-down mask, the safety of the flying saucer hat was not as good as the bucket helmet. Therefore, few knights like to wear a flying saucer hat helmet. But Marin's design of the pull-down mask ensures the safety of the flying saucer helmet. Then, it was happily accepted by the English knights. And Edward was also very straightforward: okay, from now on, the knights of England will use this style of helmet. After all, England is also an island country with a lot of rain and fog. This kind of flying saucer hat helmet suitable for use in rainy days is very suitable for the weather needs of England. In this way, a flying saucer hat helmet with a pull-down visor inspired by the game NPC and the flying saucer hat director became the standard equipment of the English knights. Even Edward himself ordered people to create a deluxe version of the flying saucer hat helmet with a pull-down visor for his own use. Chapter 1504, The Young Master's Question. After all, the flying saucer hat is only for knights and officers, but England is an island country with relatively few knights. This time, Edward only brought 2,000 knights, and with those officers, the demand for flying saucer hats was not great. As for ordinary soldiers, including the 3,000 English longbowmen brought by Edward, none of them were equipped with flying saucer hat helmets. The main reason was that there was no time to make so many. Therefore, except for those knights and officers, the rest of the soldiers were equipped with East Frisian-style straw hats to prevent their vision from being blocked by rain. This kind of straw hat is the straw hat originally worn by the East Frisian straw hat swordsman. This kind of straw hat has a large brim, which is equivalent to a small umbrella on the head. Before, the East Frisian straw hat swordsmen relied on this big hat to keep out the rain, and they didn't need an umbrella. Of course, it was also because there were no umbrellas in Europe at all. But after it was put into use, Marin also found a problem: the original East Frisian straw hat swordsman's straw hat was too big, and when the soldiers were in a square formation, the hat would affect their comrades beside them. Therefore, Marin made a change, shortening the brim of this straw hat, making the hat more similar to the straw hat of later generations. But in order to prevent rain from blocking the line of sight, the brim of the front hat is still much longer than the straw hat of later generations. Later, the Frisian officers in the Marin army began to teach the soldiers to weave their own straw hats. There are a lot of local straw, and in addition to straw hats, everyone also wears straw raincoats. With straw raincoats and straw hats, the army is no longer afraid of the rainy weather in Ireland. As for the officers and knights, they all wear plate armor including flying saucer hats and helmets during battle. Usually, they wear windbreaker raincoats provided by Marin, which is very convenient. At least, it is much lighter than straw raincoats. At this time, the army of Dublin city gathered. Even Adler, the Earl of Wicklow, came from Wicklow County with 40 knights and 1,500 soldiers. Among them, 500 were the unruly Cossack cavalry that Marin had given him. Adler is now the Earl of Wicklow. Although he belongs to the North Sea Kingdom, Edward is always the nominal monarch. Therefore, he will also participate in Edward's conquest of Ireland this time. Moreover, Adler has long been eager to participate in the war. This war is definitely a great opportunity for him. Having a brother who is too strong is also very stressful for Adler. Because people always compare him with Marin. But Adler also knows very well that in terms of martial arts, he can beat Marin a few. But in terms of military command ability, 100 of him can't match half of Marin. Therefore, being a fierce general who charges into battle honestly is his only way out. Moreover, he also likes to charge into battle. However, Marin was afraid that Adler would become powerful in the army before. In addition, he also didn't want him to get hurt. Therefore, Adler has never had the opportunity to lead his troops into battle. In Marin's several wars, he could only guard the city in the rear with militia like old Hoffman, which made him feel suffocated. So, this time, Adler was very happy to have the opportunity to charge into battle. After arriving in Dublin, Adler immediately met with the monarch Edward. Then, he asked to be a pioneer. But Edward did not agree. After all, Adler was the elder brother of his strongest ally Marin. If the pioneer was killed in the enemy's ambush, he would not be able to explain it. So, in the end, Edward gave Adler the honorary title of Deputy Commander of the Knights and asked Adler to charge with 2,000 English knights. In this way, his safety can be fully guaranteed. After all, if the 2,000 knights who were the main force were defeated, the entire army would be unsafe, and it would not matter whether someone was safe or not. As for the 1,500 people under Adler, because of the existence of 500 Cossack light cavalry, they were used as reconnaissance cavalry by Edward and scattered first. After all, these Cossacks are light cavalry and are most suitable for such work. After handing over the work and talking about brotherhood with Adler, Marin planned to leave. Before leaving, Marin repeatedly told the knights who accompanied Adler in the charge if they encountered danger, please give priority to protecting Adler's safety. If an accident occurs, the North Sea Congress will give generous rewards, even titles and fiefdoms. Marin did this not without basis. Adler is too warlike and always likes to rush to the front. That is to say, in Europe, if it were placed in ancient China, he who likes to rush to the front would definitely be the first to be hit by the tripwire, just like Guarneri who walked into Meicheng. So, he could only tell the knights who guarded his safety. After explaining many matters, Marin left Dublin on a warship. After all, the protagonist of this war is Edward, not him. It's easy for him to steal the show here. Marin had just returned to Auric and hadn't rested yet when his men suddenly reported that the handsome Prince Philip, the only son of Emperor Maximilian I, the ruler of Burgundy in the Netherlands, was visiting. Hearing that it was the eldest son's son, Marin quickly straightened his clothes and went to greet the young master of the Holy Roman Empire with a smile on his face. However, when he arrived at the gate of the palace, Marin found that the young master, Prince Philip, seemed to be unhappy, and it was almost written on his face that, I am very angry. What's the matter? I didn't offend this young master. Marin was a little confused. In the living room, after Philip spoke, Marin learned the reason. Lord Marin, you are too unkind, aren't you? Sending troops to support Edward's conquest of Ireland, why don't you send troops to help our Habsburg family? Prince Philip looked dissatisfied, and his tone was full of questioning. Marin didn't know what to say for a moment. And Prince Philip continued, Lord Marin, although Edward is your monarch, my father is also your monarch. It was my father who promoted you to knight and imperial baron. My father and our Habsburg family recognized your recovery of the county of East Frisia at the first time. Why are you unwilling to send troops to help our Habsburg family when the war situation in Switzerland is unfavorable? When King Edward of England attacked Ireland, you immediately sent a legion there. Isn't the difference too obvious? It seems that this young man is dissatisfied with the fact that he excluded the 6th Legion to support Edward, but did not send troops to support the emperor. Marin breathed a sigh of relief. This is an easy answer. Your Highness, it's not that I don't want to support His Majesty the Emperor. It's just that I dare not. Don't dare. What do you mean? Philip was a little confused. Your Highness, didn't His Majesty tell you that I, the Grand Duke of the North Sea, am very much excluded and hostile to the German princes? If it weren't for the strength of my army, I would have been destroyed several times. And, Your Highness, do you know why I am excluded by the German princes? Marin asked back. Prince Philip was stunned and answered uncertainly, is it because of your low birth? Marin sighed and said, this is only a small part of the reason. The biggest reason is that I was promoted by His Majesty the Emperor. Chapter 1505, Philip's Purpose. Ah. That's the truth. What's the reason? Prince Philip's expression was exaggerated. Seeing the young master's acting skills, Marin was speechless. But he still pretended to be patient and explained, it's like this. When His Majesty the Emperor was young, he once expressed the idea of learning from France and unifying Germany. This idea scared the German princes, so after His Majesty the Emperor ascended the throne, he was made difficult by the princes. Whenever Austria wanted to become stronger under the leadership of His Majesty the Emperor, it would be suppressed by the princes. Because they were afraid that His Majesty the Emperor would really unify Germany and cause them to lose their power. At this point, Marin paused, and the young Master Philip continued his acting skills, staring with his eyes and showing an incredible expression. But who is Marin? He was once a Dubon scorer. Although he is not a serious film critic, his basic acting skills can still be seen. It is difficult for a young actor like young Master Philip to escape his scrutiny with his acting skills. The scene where the young master stared in shock just now reminded Marin of Yang Tianbao, the wife of the leader in his previous life. Of course, although the young master's acting skills are exaggerated, Marin still has to continue to explain, pretending not to notice the other party's poor acting skills. I started by helping His Majesty the Emperor to fight wars. In theory, a strong mercenary leader like me should be very popular with those princes. However, the princes thought that if I wholeheartedly helped His Majesty the Emperor to fight a war of unified will, they would usher in the end. So, they were afraid and began to suppress me in every possible way to prevent me from becoming stronger. The stronger I am, the more worried they are. Don't you have tens of thousands of troops? Much more than our Habsburg family, what are you afraid of? Prince Philip asked curiously. This time he looked normal and didn't seem to be acting. Obviously, he was really curious about it. Marin explained, Your Highness, although I have 6 legions, the 4th and 5th legions need to be stationed in the British Isles according to the agreement reached with His Majesty Edward that year, and they cannot be transferred back to the country. Therefore, the troops I can really mobilize are only 4 legions, or in other words, only 3 legions. 3 legions? No, aren't they the 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 6th legions? Prince Philip continued to act as a curious baby. Your Highness, do you know the composition of the 6th legion? It's the new legion I sent to help attack Ireland this time. I know, it's mainly Scottish prisoners. You mean? Prince Philip was obviously not a fool, and seemed to have thought of something. Of course, he was wrong, Marin deliberately led him to think so. Marin nodded repeatedly to the young master's expected reaction. Yes, this 6th legion, which is mainly composed of Scottish surrendered soldiers, is actually raised by me for His Majesty Edward. Think about it, when His Majesty Edward destroyed the Kingdom of Scotland, these Scottish surrendered soldiers, if they continued to stay in Scotland, would be unstable factors and would easily rebel. Therefore, His Majesty Edward asked me to bring the 7,000 Scottish surrendered soldiers back to the North Sea Kingdom to form a new legion. In fact, I really monitor those Scottish surrendered soldiers, fearing that they will cause trouble. Prince Philip suddenly looked enlightened, and then asked, Then why send them to the Irish battlefield this time? His Majesty Edward is not afraid that the Scots will rebel on the battlefield? Marin shook his head. Don't worry, this time His Majesty Edward brought another 15,000 troops. Moreover, there are 3,000 Germans in the 6th Legion. And the significance of sending the Scots to attack the Irish natives this time is to make the Scots and the Irish enemies. Make the Scots and the Irish enemies? Why? Prince Philip was really curious. Marin then explained, England has just conquered Scotland and Ireland. It is certain that the Scottish and Irish will resist England's rule in recent years. His Majesty Edward is afraid that the Scots and Irish will join forces to resist England's rule. So, this time he plans to use the 7,000 Scots to deal with the Irish resistance and create some blood debts. In this way, with the existence of these blood feuds, it will be difficult for the Scots to join forces with the Irish to fight against England in the future. So that's it. It's really smart. Prince Philip exclaimed. What Marin said is true, but it was not Edward who came up with this idea, but Marin himself. After all, England, Scotland and Ireland will be ruled by Marin and his son in the future. Helping Edward to alienate the Scots and the Irish at this time is actually helping himself. Before the expedition, Marin secretly told Hanks, the commander of the 6th Army, that the discipline of the army could be lowered during the conquest of Ireland, and that the Irish natives must be hostile to the Scottish soldiers. In order to make the Irish more impressed with the Scottish soldiers, Marin specially asked the Scottish mercenaries to wear Scottish-style kilts this time, just like the ones Xiao Shenyang wore in Not Short of Money. This kind of men's kilt is a symbol of the Scottish. The Scottish Highland infantry wore Scottish-style kilts to burn, kill and loot on the island of Ireland. The Irish would definitely hate these Scots in skirts. In the future, the relationship between the two races will be tense. As the ruler, England can use the discord between the two to mediate and avoid the two families from opposing England together. After talking for a while, the problem returned to the starting point. Marin continued to explain, in other words, the troops I can mobilize now are actually only the 3 local legions. If the German princes join forces to attack me, I can't stop it. The German princes join forces to attack you? Not really. Prince Philip said uncertainly. Marin sneered and said, haha, why not? They haven't united to attack me now because I am very honest now. If I dare to send troops to help His Majesty the Emperor, they may immediately unite to attack me. Because once I send troops to help His Majesty the Emperor, I may very likely help His Majesty complete the great cause of unifying Germany. And these princes certainly don't want to see this. Therefore, as long as I dare to send troops to help His Majesty the Emperor, these people will dare to unite to fight me, so that I dare not act rashly. Marin said, 7 points true and 3 points false. After a pause, Marin continued, and, Your Highness, you may not know. If it is just the threat from the German princes, I may still have the confidence to fight back. But, if France is added. France? Prince Philip stood up in surprise. Yes, France. Your Highness should not have forgotten how I came to power. I came to power by defeating the previous King of France, Charles VIII. Therefore, the French have always been unhappy with me. If those German princes unite and organize a large army to attack me, the French will probably also organize a large army to help me. Moreover, France and the Habsburg family are mortal enemies. If I send troops to help His Majesty the Emperor, it is very likely that the French will send a large army and unite with the German princes to destroy me. Prince Philip was silent for a moment. He also understood that Marin was telling the truth. Also, Your Highness, do you know why I sent troops to help His Majesty Edward and get an earldom in England? Marin suddenly asked back. This is to expand the territory of the Hoffman family? Prince Philip replied. Marin shook his head and said, No, I am leaving a way out for the Hoffman family. After that, Marin pointed to the map of Europe on the wall of the reception room and said, Your Highness, please see that the North Sea Kingdom is located on the European continent. Facing the joint attack of the German princes and France, it will definitely not be able to stop it. Therefore, in order to prevent the Hoffman family from being destroyed, I specially got an earldom in England. If one day, the North Sea Kingdom is really destroyed by the German princes and France, we will flee to England and continue to be the great lords. And if there is no backup, once the North Sea Kingdom is destroyed, the Hoffman family will be removed from the nobility. Having said that, Prince Philip could no longer accuse Marin of not sending troops to assist the emperor. Especially after Marin pointed out that the Hoffman family was ready to flee to England at any time, he could no longer ask Marin to send troops. Moreover, this time he came to Auric, not really to ask Marin to send troops to help, but just to put pressure on Marin to help the Habsburg family more or less. Moreover, Marin's behavior of sending tens of thousands of troops to help the second loyal monarch, King Edward, but not to help the first loyal monarch, His Majesty the Emperor, was indeed morally unacceptable, and it was very much like the behavior of a traitor. It was precisely because of this that Prince Philip pretended to be very angry and ran to Auric, blaming Marin, but actually putting pressure on Marin to squeeze some benefits from Marin to help the Habsburg family in the war in Switzerland. But Prince Philip's acting skills are average. Although he is already very good among young people of his generation, in Marin's eyes, it is just the acting skills of young people in later generations. After Marin brought up the argument that the Hoffman family is ready to abandon the North Sea Kingdom and flee to England at any time, Prince Philip could no longer find an excuse to put pressure on Marin. So, Prince Philip had to change his tone and said in a pleading tone, Grand Duke Marin, please help my father. The North Sea Kingdom and the Habsburg family are allies. The stronger the allies are, the greater the help they can get. So, please, Grand Duke Marin, for the sake of my father, help our Habsburg family. Chapter 1506, Helping. Seeing that Prince Philip failed to coerce and changed to a warm approach, Marin was speechless. However, the Crown Prince of the Holy Roman Empire came to him to play tricks, which showed that the Habsburg family was a little anxious. Speaking of Switzerland, the recent war situation is indeed unfavorable to the Habsburg family. When the French sent troops to Italy, they also sent back 10,000 Swiss mercenaries, with the leader of the Swiss mercenaries, Marin's old friend Sieg as the supreme commander. After Sieg returned to Switzerland with 10,000 Swiss mercenaries, the French withdrew thousands of elite French troops who were originally disguised as Swiss militia. But Sieg brought back more people, and they were all former veterans. Therefore, the Swiss resistance army was not weakened, but increased to 27,000 people. And Sieg became the new leader of the 27,000 Swiss resistance army. Facing the 35,000 troops of the Habsburg family, Sieg's 27,000 people seemed to be weaker. But in fact, this is not the case. Sieg brought back veteran Swiss mercenaries, who are stronger than the original Swiss resistance fighters. The original more than 10,000 Swiss resistance troops were not mercenaries, but Swiss mountaineers who were forced to take up arms to resist after the Habsburgs returned to Switzerland. Although they were tougher than ordinary mountaineers, they were also limited in strength. Fortunately, the French sent thousands of elite soldiers disguised as Swiss militia to help fight and blocked the offensive of the Habsburgs. Otherwise, the western part of Switzerland would have been unified by the Habsburgs at this time. Now, Sieg has returned with 10,000 veterans, so that the strength of the Swiss resistance has not been weakened, but strengthened. Sieg is not the same as the general Swiss mercenary leader. He is younger and more cunning. In the long street battle hired by Marin to eliminate the West Frisian noble republic, Sieg was inspired by Marin's command method and learned the tactics of ambush and outflanking. Later, Sieg quickly emerged among the Swiss mercenary leaders with his ambush and outflanking tactics. Over the years, the former Swiss mercenary bosses were killed or died of illness. Then, Sieg, who was not originally ranked, survived in a concentration camp by relying on his youth, and suddenly found that he had become the leader of the Swiss mercenaries. After taking over the Swiss resistance, Sieg changed the rigid frontal combat plan formulated by the French noble officers and used a more flexible plan. For example, in a battle to attack Lucerne, Sieg deliberately pretended to be defeated and lured the Lucerne defenders to chase out of the city. Then, he used the reserve troops to ambush halfway and wiped out the pursuers in one fell swoop, causing Lucerne's more than 10,000 defenders to lose nearly 4,000 men and horses. If it weren't for the Lucerne defenders who decisively blocked the narrow valley road with several carriages, Lucerne city might have changed hands by now. After this battle, the Swiss resistance began to take the initiative, changing defense to offense, moving and doing things, making the Habsburg family army very embarrassed. After suffering a loss, Emperor Maximilian I wrote to his son to complain, saying that he was not strong enough now, and it would be great if he could persuade Marin to send troops to help. Of course, the emperor just complained. Because he was also very clear about Marin's situation, he did not really send anyone to ask Marin to send troops to help. And Marin had been able to lend him hundreds of thousands of gold coins before, which was already very righteous. But Crown Prince Philip was different. Although he also knew Marin's difficulties, he did not intend to let Marin go so easily. After all, in the eyes of the young master of the empire, shouldn't Marin, as a young man promoted by Maximilian I, contribute more to the Habsburg family's plan? So, he deliberately came to the door, put on an ugly face and an unfriendly attitude, just to knock Marin and let him help more or less. But how cunning is Marin? There are a lot of reasons, which made Philip speechless. In desperation, Crown Prince Philip changed to a warm and affectionate route. Although he despised Crown Prince Philip's poor acting skills, Marin also knew that since the young master had come to play tricks, it proved that the Habsburg family was indeed having a hard time. If he didn't express it at all, he would definitely be criticized. After all, in the eyes of the outside world, Marin did rely on Maximilian I to get to the top. At this time, he had just sent 10,000 troops to help Edward. If he didn't help Emperor Maximilian I at all, he would definitely be despised. Of course, he wouldn't really send troops to help the emperor. After all, this matter was too sensitive. So, Marin thought about it and decided to use some special methods to help his old boss, the emperor. First of all, Marin naturally provided a batch of weapons to His Majesty the Emperor. Providing weapons to friendly forces is a trick that has been played very well by various countries in later generations, and it is also the safest. Providing weapons can make allies feel friendly. Moreover, there is no need to send people to die on your side. Marin may not have much else, but the number of weapons and gunpowder is still sufficient. Therefore, Marin directly prepared to support His Majesty the Emperor with 3,000 matchlock guns to strengthen the defense strength of the Austrian army in Switzerland. Because the domestic matchlock guns have been discontinued, the original stock of matchlock guns have been given away, including to the Ming dynasty. Therefore, matchlock guns need to be newly made now. However, there is only one military factory in the North Sea Kingdom that produces matchlock guns, and the matchlock guns produced by that military factory are the imitation Rumi guns that Marin intended to sell to the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt before. Marin thought about it, and it seemed that the Battle of Dabik Prairie in northern Syria between the Ottoman Turkey and the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt would not break out until 2 years later. Therefore, Marin decided to suspend the imitation of Rumi guns and instead help His Majesty the Emperor forge matchlock guns for defending the city. At present, the Habsburg family army is on the defensive, and if it is to defend the city, it is best to use matchlock guns. As for the production of matchlock guns, Marin was also quite lazy. He directly asked people to reduce the length of the 2-meter-long Rumi gun to the normal 1.5 meters. Then, the Arabic-style pattern carvings on the gun body were all omitted. The reason for such a magical change is that this change is more conducive to the Habsburg family's defense war. Moreover, it is not easy for the Turks to see the origin of the musket. The shortened barrel can greatly facilitate the loading of ammunition by the musketeer. After all, it is too difficult to load a 2-meter rummy gun. When loading a muzzle-loading gun, the gun body must be erected to facilitate the pouring of gunpowder. But the 2-meter-long rummy gun is too exaggerated. If the gun body is erected, there are few people who are more than 2 meters tall who can load this gun. Unless, they can only use the tactics of the musket before one person shoots, and one person helps to load. Moreover, the gun body must be tilted and one person supports it, which is very inconvenient. After Marin shortened the gun length from 2 meters to 1.5 meters, it was very convenient. When defending the city, people stood behind the battlements, and the rummy gun that was too high and too long was not very suitable. Because loading ammunition into such a long musket, it is easy to show up and be killed by the enemy. Therefore, the 1.5-meter-long matchlock gun is more suitable for the Habsburg family army used to defend the city. Therefore, Marin finally agreed to provide Crown Prince Philip with 3,000 weakened versions of the rummy gun. At the same time, he was willing to provide a large amount of saltpeter at cost price for the emperor to use to prepare black gunpowder. Now Marin's men have begun to steadily develop saltpeter mines in the desert area of northern Chile, and at this moment, he has no shortage of saltpeter. Of course, when handing it over to Crown Prince Philip, Marin naturally cried and described the process of getting saltpeter in an exaggerated way, highlighting the difficulty of obtaining saltpeter. Of course, he can also show his sincerity. Chapter 1507 The first batch of high school graduates. Although he failed to borrow troops, Crown Prince Philip was satisfied with 3,000 matchlocks and a large amount of saltpeter. Matchlocks are easy to say, lead bullets are not rare, but saltpeter is rare. This is Europe, and the price of saltpeter is very high. Crown Prince Philip also knew that Marin could buy saltpeter from India, but after hearing that Spain and Portugal also bought saltpeter in India, he didn't think Marin could buy much saltpeter in India. After all, the demand for saltpeter from those two countries was also very large. Therefore, Marin was willing to give a large amount of saltpeter, which was still very loyal. He didn't know that after sending away Crown Prince Philip with a satisfied face, Marin was greatly relieved. After all, the second generation is the most difficult to deal with. These people may not be able to accomplish things, but they have ways to ruin your things. Although Prince Philip is the son of Maximilian I, he is talented and smart, but probably because he was separated from Maximilian I since childhood and lived alone in Ghent, he failed to receive Maximilian I's teachings. Therefore, although he is very talented, he has the common problem of the second generation of later generations, being too self-centered. As a monarch, Emperor Maximilian I knew very well that his subordinates also needed interests. Therefore, Maximilian I was more tolerant of his subordinates and was willing to consider their interests. For example, in the Swiss hegemony war, the emperor never mentioned asking Marin to send troops to help. Because the emperor considered from Marin's standpoint and understood Marin's difficulties. Prince Philip is different. He probably has no parents to discipline him since he was a child, and has developed the idea of, I am the only one. When he interacts with people, he doesn't consider other people's feelings at all, and he does what he likes. This is very similar to those spoiled only children in later generations. Because they were spoiled and not well educated since childhood, they have no habit of considering others, and everything is self-centered. Of course, unlike those spoiled and poorly educated only children, Crown Prince Philip has developed his selfish character because he has no mother since he was a child and his father is far away in Austria. No one teaches him carefully. The selfish only children in China are purely spoiled by their parents. Parents always think that their children are still young and can't bear to beat them. When they think they can beat them, the children have already twisted their minds. In short, China has been cheated by the so-called various educational methods of the Americans. Some idiots who have studied in the United States always like to promote the educational philosophy of the Americans. For example, don't beat children, let children release their nature play. Little do they know that the Americans do let their children play, but they are children in public schools. And the children in public schools are children from poor families, the group of people who have been abandoned. These children are deliberately indulged, so that when they grow up, they will not threaten the children of rich families. Children in private schools are actually forced to study hard and strive to maintain their status in the upper class. For example, although Obama is half black, he has received elite education at Punahou School, a private school in Honolulu since he was a child. Most of the students who go to public schools are children from ordinary families who are left alone. If Obama had studied in public schools since childhood, maybe there would be another black criminal in the United States. At most, he would be a player. And when those so-called education experts studied in the United States, they mostly came into contact with ordinary students from public schools, and naturally learned about the casual education model. Because they can't get into the circle of Americans who receive elite education, they won't play with them. So, they can only hang out with those poor American students and even black people. In this way, they naturally get wrong information. Then, these bastards took this wrong information back to fool the Chinese people. Don't beat your children, stick education is backward and barbaric. Look, how advanced is the casual education method of American fathers. At that time, parents didn't understand it either. Seeing these experts pretending to be cool, they believed their lies. As a result, a large number of people born in the 1990s and 2000s were raised crippled by their parents. Why did so many brainless fans appear later? Obviously, he was beaten less when he was young. And the most important time for children to be strictly disciplined is when they are young. Because it is too late to discipline them after they become adults, and they can't be disciplined anymore. As long as they don't get hurt, beating them is actually healthier. This is how China has been educated for thousands of years, and it can be considered a large number of talents. Moreover, there has never been any brain damage. Instead, they believed the nonsense of the old Americans and did some quality education, releasing the nature of children. Then, brain damage appeared on a large scale. Well, Marin thought a lot and felt that Crown Prince Philip was actually the same as those children in later generations who were educated by quality and released their nature. He was beaten too little when he was young, so he was so self-centered and dandy. Therefore, this guy turned his face to Marin, a powerful lord. As soon as he came, his father didn't dare to do this. Although he is a little clever, it will eventually make people disunited. Fortunately, this child is not stupid enough. In view of Marin's strong strength, he didn't dare to turn his face directly. Otherwise, Marin can only change his camp. In fact, Marin is looking forward to him turning against himself. In this way, he can take the opportunity to leave the emperor's faction and make the princes not hostile to him. But this child has not reached the level of the brain-dead children in later generations. He restrained his temper in time, which made Marin a little regretful. But his domineering behavior has actually offended people. Marin is a Grand Duke with tens of thousands of troops, not a servant of the Habsburg family. This guy came over carelessly and sprayed Marin, which was actually a taboo. If Marin was still a baron or a count with no strength, there would be nothing wrong with him doing this. But now Marin is considered a top power in Germany, and doing this is a bit offensive. Fortunately, Marin is an old shady man and doesn't care about these. If he changes to a small-minded person, he might have a grudge. Seeing his nominal, young master, like this, Marin suddenly worried about the future little, young master, Charles V. With such a father, can Charles V still grow to the point in the original history? You know, originally in history, Charles V was actually raised by Margaret of Austria, who was more talented than his brother. Now, he is raised by an unreliable father, and I don't know if he will be disabled. However, Marin quickly adjusted his mentality. Charles V is not my son, who cares whether he is disabled or not. Maybe it is more beneficial to be disabled. In this way, Caesar will have one less strong enemy in the future. Marin can predict that in a few decades, Europe will definitely be dominated by the current few little princes. For example, Charles of the Habsburg family, Caesar of his own family, Marin, the son of Juan III of Spain and Margaret. By the way, it seems that the Crown Prince of Poland is also called Marin. Will there be two Marin kings in the future? Well, there is also Francois I, who is probably the oldest among these people. After all, the others are little pea kids, and Francois I is about to get married. His son Caesar has the lowest birth among these children, but Marin has prepared Britain and America for Caesar, and has taken the lead in resources. The future competition may not be worse than that of the other children. Moreover, Marin's faking death last time seemed to have made little Caesar grow up overnight. Now he can discuss national affairs with him. Just this point, Caesar has already started to take the lead. Just when Marin was daydreaming, Da Vinci knocked on the door of Marin's office. "What's wrong, Ada? What's the matter?" Da Vinci nodded and said, "There is one thing, and it's very important. The first batch of middle school students who studied mathematics, physics and chemistry before have graduated." "What? Those elementary school graduates graduated from high school?" Marin stood up in surprise. But he suddenly remembered that before he went to Daming, those kids had graduated from elementary school and started high school. Now, more than 4 years have passed, and these kids have almost graduated from high school. Then, the next step is to select college students from these high school graduates. Obviously, this is a big deal. Otherwise, Da Vinci would not have come to him. Chapter 1508, Marin's College Admissions Method. More than 4 years ago, the first batch of elementary school students graduated from Beihai. Marin selected the smartest 2,000 students from 6,000 elementary school students and continued to train them to learn middle school courses. Beihai's middle school courses are very sloppy, and all the textbooks are written by Marin. Mathematics, physics and chemistry are nothing, just copy them directly. As for the Chinese textbooks, Marin was so entangled. The Chinese textbooks of later generations of China obviously cannot be copied, because there are too many revolutionary ideas in them. As a feudal monarch, how can I encourage students to do themselves? And those ancient Chinese poems, Marin can't copy them. After all, these are two different civilization systems. In desperation, Marin had to write his own textbooks. How to write it? The Bible has been studied in elementary school, and those who can graduate from elementary school can basically recite it backwards. So, you have to copy something else. Then, the works of the Renaissance naturally became the object of Marin's plagiarism. What Dante's Divine Comedy, Boccaccio's Decameron, and various excellent works of the Renaissance have all become the objects of Marin's plagiarism. Of course, they are all excerpts. But the works of the Renaissance are limited. After all, middle schools are divided into junior high schools and high schools. Then, Marin began to plagiarize ancient Greek literary works. Then, the works of the three ancient Greek sages, Plato, Socrates and Aristotle, suffered. But it was still not enough. Aesop's fables are easy to understand, but they have long been plagiarized in elementary school Chinese. So, Marin thought about it and finally thought of a plagiarism point, the chicken soup articles he saw in Reader and Youth Digest in his previous life. Although these chicken soup articles were criticized by people in later generations, it was mainly because people in later generations read more and became difficult to fool. But if these chicken soup articles are used to fool middle school students, it's a perfect match. Therefore, Marin began to plagiarize a large number of chicken soup articles from later generations. Replaced the social background of later generations with that of this era, and one after another chicken soup articles that seemed thought-provoking appeared. Then, the Chinese textbook of Beihai National Middle School was made up by Marin alone. The poor middle school students of Beihai State grew up reading the chicken soup articles compiled by Marin for several years. But what surprised Marin was that those chicken soup articles that were criticized in modern times were actually very popular among middle school students of Beihai State. After all, those chicken soup articles are all good stories. In this era without any entertainment, reading chicken soup articles is definitely a good way to pass the time, comparable to reading in later generations. For this reason, Marin's pseudonym, Tolstoy, for writing chicken soup articles was praised by middle school students of Beihai State as the first literary giant of Beihai State. As for the textbooks of mathematics, physics and chemistry, mathematics is directly copied. But the physics and chemistry textbooks were greatly changed by Marin, and they were changed beyond recognition. All the parts of physics involving astronomy and other parts that may touch the taboos of the Holy See were cut out, and most of the optics part was also cut out. Because, optics contains the secrets of designing and manufacturing telescopes. If all 2,000 middle school students understand it, as long as one of them is bribed, the telescope secrets will be leaked. As for mechanics, this was one of the top secrets of the North Sea Kingdom in Marin's mind, so it was naturally cut from the middle school textbooks. Of course, it was not cancelled, but turned into university textbooks. And electricity and the like were also cut. Because it was useless to teach this thing, there was no condition for practice and application. But Marin still turned electricity into a separate manual, named The Book of Heaven, and prepared to put it in the university library. If there is a genius interested, he can study it on his own. As for the chemistry part, Marin felt that most of it needed to be kept confidential. Therefore, several chemistry textbooks were cut by Marin to only one basic chemistry textbook. The rest were all divided into university courses. In other words, the middle school courses studied by middle school students in the North Sea Kingdom were castrated versions. Therefore, it took only more than 4 years for students to complete the 6-year middle school course. There was no way, physics and chemistry were cut too much. Moreover, if the middle school had not added many military training courses, it is estimated that the middle school would not need more than 4 years. After more than 4 years of exploratory education, the school system of Beihai Kingdom was finally determined. The primary school is a 5-year system, divided into 3 years of junior primary school and 2 years of senior primary school. the secondary school is a 4-year system, divided into 2 years of junior high school and 2 years of senior high school. Among them, the 3-year junior primary school will be popularized throughout the country in the future, and all children will go to school, and the state will cover part of the cost. As for the 2-year senior primary school, students who have graduated from the junior primary school must pass the examination and be selected. Only those who have passed all the subjects are eligible to continue to study in the senior primary school. After graduating from the senior primary school, they will be screened again, and only those with scores above 70 points will be selected to continue to study in the middle school. After the 4 years of middle school, they will be assessed again, but the assessment method is not based on grades alone. In the middle school of Beihai Kingdom, in addition to Chinese, mathematics, physics and chemistry, there are military courses, English courses and ideological education courses. The purpose of setting up English courses is very simple, which is to prepare for the future unification of England. As for the ideological education class, it was even simpler. It was the disciples of Bishop Taylor who brainwashed the children, requiring them to be morally noble and loyal to Marin and Marin's successor every day. And those big liar disciples sent by Marin to teach the children ideological and moral classes had received spy training from Kohler before coming, and specially learned spy methods to observe the children's thoughts. During normal classes, especially when encouraging children to be loyal to Marin and Marin's successor, those disciples of Taylor would take out small notebooks to record the children's usual performance. Any child who showed a little disdain or was not pious enough would be recorded in the small notebook. This kind of record was called usual performance. Similarly, children who showed enough fanaticism and piety would also be recorded in the notebook as a positive image. This kind of usual performance record usually did not affect the children's life and study at all. However, now that it is time to select college students, it is used. At this moment, when selecting college students, Marin personally rushed to the school, flipping through the small notebook while selecting college students with Da Vinci and other teachers. Well, this kid named John is not bad. He usually studies well and his thinking is very progressive, physics is his forte. Okay, admit him to the mechanical major and learn mechanical design and manufacturing with you, Ada. Da Vinci also nodded repeatedly, agreeing to accept this child. Then, Marin continued to look through the transcripts and small notebooks. This kid named Adam has excellent grades, but his thinking is not progressive enough. Marin saw that some negative information about Adam was recorded in the small notebook. But this kid is really smart. In particular, he is excellent in mathematics, physics and chemistry. Da Vinci was a little anxious, because this was the seedling he was optimistic about. Marin glanced at Da Vinci with a squint and said, "No matter how smart you are, if you are not loyal enough, you are not allowed to study core courses. But it's a pity for such a smart child not to go to college." Da Vinci said regretfully. Marin laughed and said, "It's okay. I'll let him go to college." Well, how about the mathematics department? That also requires intelligence. Moreover, it doesn't involve core secrets. Da Vinci was stunned. This seems to be a good idea. Mathematics is the foundation of science and requires intelligence. However, no matter how well you learn mathematics, it is not confidential. Letting a smart child who is not particularly reliable learn mathematics neither wastes his intelligence nor makes him involved in secrets. Then it will be easy. Marin selected 200 excellent in character and learning and talented in physics from 2,000 middle school students to study mechanics in the physics major, and selected 200 children who were also excellent in character and learning and talented in chemistry to study chemical engineering. As for the rest, 100 extremely smart but unreliable children were selected to study mathematics. And another 300 children, because of their family background, were selected to study traditional university majors such as law and economics. Basically, they are going to be in politics in the future. In this way, Marin used the small book screening method to hastily decide the admission of 800 college students, which was eye-opening. Chapter 1509, Educational Issues in the English Territory. In fact, there are no fixed textbooks for science and engineering majors in Beihai University. Because the textbooks for mechanical majors only have the content that was originally deleted from the high school physics textbooks provided by Marin, which is not enough at all. If you really want to take classes, it is estimated that you will finish learning in half a semester. The textbooks for chemistry majors are much better, because Marin deleted most of the high school chemistry and used it as a university textbook, but it is only enough to teach for more than a year. Moreover, the most pitfall is that the person who teaches mechanical and chemical majors in Beihai University is still Da Vinci, and he is the only one. There is no way, who said that Beihai has no other physics and chemistry talents at all. Not only that, Da Vinci, as a math expert, will have to take on the math education of the 100 top students who have outstanding grades but are not loyal enough in the future, and teach them advanced mathematical knowledge such as solid geometry and calculus. These are the liberal arts versions of advanced mathematics that Marin learned when he was studying liberal arts majors. For these 100 smart children, Marin's positioning is the future math teacher. Moreover, their school system is only 2 years. After completing the course, he can be a math teacher in Beihai Middle School and Primary School. As for the lack of teaching materials for the mechanics major, Marin and Leonardo da Vinci discussed and decided to take out all the manuscripts used by Leonardo da Vinci when he developed the Watt steam engine as teaching materials. These manuscripts are all records of Leonardo da Vinci's development of steam engines over the years. The content is very detailed, and Leonardo da Vinci, the author, personally appeared to explain, which is absolutely very vivid. With Leonardo da Vinci's manuscripts of steam engine research in recent years, Marin feels that the textbooks for the mechanics major can last for 1 or 2 years. Then, students of the mechanics major who have a certain foundation can help Leonardo da Vinci develop and improve steam engines together, and jointly develop steam engine propulsion systems for trains and ships. Presumably, after a few years, a group of masters of mechanics will be trained. The chemistry class is also taught by Leonardo da Vinci. However, Leonardo da Vinci spent less time on research in chemistry, and may not be able to train very powerful students. For this reason, Marin thought about it and decided to hire several traditional alchemists to come as teaching assistants in the Department of Chemistry to help study chemistry together. Although these alchemists lack the theoretical basis of science, their practical ability is much better than that of Leonardo da Vinci. With their help, Leonardo da Vinci's chemistry class will be much better. Even Marin is ready to go to the Department of Chemistry to be a guest lecturer if he has time, to give some demonstrations and explanations to students. After all, Marin is ahead of this era in terms of knowledge in chemistry. Although Marin only studied high school chemistry in his previous life, his knowledge has far exceeded that of scientific giants of this era such as Leonardo da Vinci. In other words, there are only 2 science and engineering majors in Beihai University. One is the basis of mechanics separated from high school physics, the other is high school chemistry separated from high school chemistry. This is also unavoidable, who told Marin that he only knows the physics and chemistry knowledge of high school Chengdu. Therefore, only part of the physics and chemistry knowledge of high school can be regarded as university knowledge. Even, whether it is mechanics or chemistry, there is no perfect textbook, and the establishment of the 2 majors is also very hasty. Marin's plan is to let Leonardo da Vinci lead these 2 majors while exploring. By the time the students of these 2 majors graduate, it will be enough time for da Vinci, Marin and other related teachers to sort out suitable teaching materials. By the way, the great painter Dürer has also been sent by Marin to be an assistant to da Vinci. Da Vinci is old, and Dürer is very talented. Let him follow da Vinci for a few years, just in time to take over da Vinci's class. And most of the 300 students who were selected to study traditional university majors such as law, economics, politics and accounting are children of nobles in the North Sea Kingdom who do not like war. Many of them are children of civil servants, and they plan to follow in their father's footsteps and become civil servants in the future. Only some children of civilians did not go to military school because of their weak health, but chose to be civil servants. As for the theology major at the University of Auric, I'm sorry, it is not open to ordinary middle school students, but only to the church. In other words, the theology major at the University of Auric is recruited by young priests selected from churches across the North Sea. This major is for the church and is not open to the outside world. Except for the 800 high school graduates who were selected as college students, Marin did not leave out the remaining 1,200 unsuccessful candidates. After all, their high school education is considered highly educated in the current era of Beihai country. For these 1,200 unsuccessful high school students, Marin screened them again. The basis for selection is still loyalty. Among them, 200 people with the highest loyalty and decent education level were selected to enter the senior military academy for further training, and they will be officers when they come out. This is much better than those children who graduated from elementary school and entered the military academy. They have a higher starting point. Those who graduated from elementary school and entered the military academy for further study may not become officers after they come out. And the probability of students from the military academy becoming officers is very high. For the remaining 1,000 people, Marin selected the 200 people with the best education and prepared to send them to schools in various places as elementary school teachers. For the remaining 800 people, Marin simply found the heads of various factories in Beihai country and asked them to choose people. These are high school graduates, top students of this era. Sure enough, they caused a scramble in various factories. Even Columbus, the principal of the captain's school, came over in person and asked Marin to take 200 people for training. Marin must meet Columbus's request. Moreover, it is a priority. And Morigen, Bartle, Lu Tai and other medical leaders also took 100 people to train them into powerful doctors. In this way, 2,000 high school graduates from the North Sea Kingdom were easily digested by the North Sea Kingdom. Of course, the next batch of middle school students can come out next year. Just when the North Sea Kingdom was busy dividing up 2,000 high school graduates, the palace minister Old Mason, who was far away in Newcastle, also sent people to find Marin and asked Marin to provide a group of high school graduates from Frisian origin. The reason is that he wants to run a school in Newcastle. At present, Marin has obtained Northumberland for several years. After serving as the Prime Minister of Newcastle, Old Mason worked diligently to stabilize the situation in Northumberland and started economic development. But Old Mason found a problem: the local English seemed to have a gap with the Germans. Mainly, the locals regarded Old Mason and a group of officials from Germany who only spoke German as outsiders and had no sense of closeness. There was a gap between the two sides, and it was naturally inconvenient for Old Mason to manage the local area. But Old Mason found that Frisian officers such as Sakara, who also came from Germany, got along well with the locals. The reason is also very simple: Frisian officers such as Sakara spoke Frisian and had no obstacles to communicating with the English. Then, Old Mason began to be tempted: if he could recruit a group of subordinates who could speak English, things would be easy to handle. Coincidentally, a ship sent to the port of Newcastle set off from Emden these days and brought the news that the first batch of high school students in the North Sea had graduated. Old Mason was very interested in the news. When he learned that English was a compulsory course for middle school students in Bahai country, his eyes lit up immediately. So, he sent someone to find Marin, hoping to get at least 200 high school graduates, mainly to help him deal with government affairs and deal with local English people. And, to run schools in the local area, publicize Marin's kindness, and consolidate Marin's rule in Northumberland. After receiving the request from Old Mason, Marin stood up immediately. Because he suddenly discovered a problem: he didn't seem to have run an education in the territory over in England. This is a huge oversight. If there are no people in England who support him, how can he unite England in the future? Therefore, Marin urgently summoned the various units that had originally divided up those high school graduates, and selected 200 high school graduates who learned English very well and sent them to Newcastle. However, Marin emphasized to Old Mason he was only allowed to take away 50 of the 200 high school students to help him rule the local English. The other 150 people were sent to churches throughout Northumberland, using local churches to teach local children elementary school-level cultural knowledge for free on non-Sunday afternoons. At the same time, brainwash those children from an early age: Marin is the savior, and we must always be loyal to Marin and Marin's successor. Chapter 15:10 The significance of straw textiles. Using the local church as a place for education is the quickest way. After all, it is troublesome to build a new school. Not only does it cost a lot to build, but it also requires maintenance. Most importantly, it takes a long time to repair. If you want to build 150 primary schools in Northumberland, God knows when it will be completed and put into use. And Marin obviously can't wait, so he simply decided to open a school in the local church. It just so happens that there are many tables and chairs used by believers in the church for worship, and it is a lot of trouble to use them as desks for children on non-Sundays. But this incident also made Marin realize a serious problem: he actually forgot the education problem of the territory in the UK. In fact, when he sent troops to help Edward seize England and Scotland, Marin thought about promoting brainwashing education in his territory in the future. But later, because he was busy going to the Ming dynasty, Marin forgot about it. Now, fortunately, it's not too late for Old Mason to mention it. So, while Marin dispatched 150 primary school teachers to the English territory, he also set his sights on the local church. First of all, Marin needed to seize power and manage the teachings in his own territory to prevent the local church from forming its own system. Therefore, Marin first had to obtain the approval of the Church of England to readjust the positions of the church leaders in Northumberland, the Isle of Wight, and the border counties and highlands of Scotland under his name. The purpose of the adjustment is to transfer the local snakes of the original churches in various places to make them lose their local snake attributes, so that they can control the church more conveniently. This problem is difficult for others, but it is indeed a piece of cake for Marin. He only needs to write a letter to the Pope's father-in-law and ask him to order the Church of England to transfer the church appointment rights of his territory to himself. Although it is not quite in accordance with the rules, it is not impossible. After all, the Holy See is the boss of the church. After obtaining authorization, Marin intends to completely replace the management areas of the church leaders in several of his territories. At the same time, it also let the priests in his territory get an important message: your personnel rights belong to me, don't be uncooperative. Then, it's the control of the grassroots of the church. On the one hand, Marin plans to select young missionaries in his own territory and enter the Department of Theology of Warwick University for systematic study. Then Bishop Taylor, the big liar, and his first-generation disciples will deceive these young missionaries and make them completely their supporters. When Bishop Taylor and his disciples complete the brainwashing education of these young missionaries from England and Scotland who come to study, they can arrange their future work according to the loyalty of these young priests to themselves. Those with the highest loyalty will be assigned important positions and reused. Those with low loyalty will go back to be grassroots priests. Those who have a rebellious mind will simply find an excuse to clear them out of the church. Or, send them to places like Africa where they are in danger of death and let them fend for themselves. But those plans will not be realized until a few years later. It will take several years for the young priests in the territory to study and produce results. However, the education of local children can be started immediately. After all, it is relatively simple to use the local church for primary education. After all, in Europe, even the most remote villages have churches. Just send the 150 high school graduates who are primary school teachers to Northumberland. Then, they can be assigned to churches in various places to be teachers. By then, Marin will equip them with enough textbooks, as well as blackboards and chalks. There are also sand trays for children to practice writing. Giving children free paper and pens is extremely luxurious in this era, and Marin will not do that. Therefore, it is most cost-effective to equip children with sand trays that can be smoothed and rewritten at any time. It costs nothing to write and draw on the sand in the sand tray with a pen made of branches. Back then, Yu Fei also came this way, and later became a big boss. In fact, the straw shoes, straw raincoats, and writing on the sand tray that Marin introduced to the North Sea Kingdom, which seem to be very rustic inventions, are very useful. Because these inventions are very cheap, there is no cost, but they are very practical. Of course, the shoemakers in Beihai Kingdom were out of luck. In the past, the people of Beihai Kingdom always had to go to shoemakers to buy shoes. But the straw shoes promoted by Marin were low-cost and comfortable to wear, which made many shoemakers unemployed. The few shoemakers who survived had to make leather shoes exclusively for the rich. After all, the rich and the nobles would not choose to wear straw shoes. But on the other hand, straw shoes are too affordable for most people in Beihai Kingdom. Not only are they easy to use, but they are also cheap and everyone can afford them. In fact, straw weaving has become a very popular craft in Beihai Kingdom, and the poor can do it. Some poor families, because they can't afford to buy cloth to make clothes, even use thatch to weave clothes instead of expensive clothes. Especially during normal labor, some poor people simply wear straw clothes to work. Cloth clothes are only worn during festivals and when traveling far away. Of course, this is also related to the cooler climate in the German region. If you are in the tropics, you will get heatstroke if you wear thick straw clothes. Moreover, since the promotion of straw raincoats in the North Sea, ordinary people have found that it seems that wearing straw raincoats in winter is also quite warm. They can't afford down jackets or cotton clothes, but after wearing straw raincoats, they can go out to work in winter. Unlike before, they dared not go out without thick clothes, and could only shiver in the thatched house in winter. The appearance of straw raincoats and straw sandals greatly reduced the chances of serfs in the North Sea being frozen to death in winter. As for writing on the sand table, it gave many children from poor families the opportunity to learn and write. Otherwise, they couldn't afford paper and pens to learn cultural knowledge. In the winter, when Marin went out of the city to inspect the dairy cow breeding base and the dairy sheep breeding base, he found that the rural roads were full of farmers wearing straw raincoats, straw sandals, and straw hats. If they stood still in the field, they would be mistaken for scarecrows from a distance. Of course, only the poor serfs in the countryside would wear a full set of straw fabrics without any hesitation. In the city of Auric, the living conditions of the residents were much better, so they naturally did not need to wear straw clothes, but wore normal clothes. After all, people in the city were more concerned about face. However, many people still wore straw sandals. After all, leather shoes were too expensive. Moreover, shoes wore out faster and were not as durable as clothes. The other type of shoes with wooden soles was cheaper than leather shoes, but they could not be worn at all. Therefore, the working people of Beihai Kingdom usually liked to wear straw sandals to work. Even if they were worn out, they could just weave another pair, which was almost free of cost, but only took a little time. In short, the extremely low-cost straw fabrics were of great significance to Beihai Kingdom. It allowed the poor people of Beihai Kingdom to wear warm clothes, and it was also rainproof and cold-proof. Not to mention straw sandals, this high-frequency, low-cost consumable product increased the enthusiasm of Beihai farmers to work. Because they don't worry about the shoes getting worn out. After all, they don't have to spend a lot of money to make them. They can run and work as much as they want without worrying about their shoes getting damaged. Chapter 15:11 Honeycomb Briquette. Of course, when it comes to straw fabrics, we can't forget the adobe houses that Marin promoted a long time ago. This kind of house built with yellow mud and thatch was a symbol of poverty in China at the end of the 20th century. But in Europe in the early 16th century, it was a mansion in the eyes of the poor. After all, this kind of adobe house has complete facilities. There are earth stoves with chimneys, and kangs that can be heated in winter. For the poor serfs in Germany, living in this kind of adobe house is equivalent to living in a mansion. More importantly, the construction cost of this kind of house is extremely low, and only a few pieces of wood are needed. It is mainly made of yellow mud and thatch, and it is fast to build. Living in such a house is many times better than the thatched houses that the serfs used to live in. At present, in the countryside of Beihai country, except for the wealthy families, almost every family lives in adobe houses built with plates. This kind of adobe house, like the thatched houses that poor people lived in Europe in the past, is mainly made of mud and grass. However, the European thatched house is built with branches and thatch first, and then mud is applied on the net. However, this structure is not strong, and the mud is easy to fall off. Once the mud falls off, the whole house becomes windy and leaky. The adobe house is built with yellow mud with thatch, bones, for the construction, and the ramming and fire baking are added in the later stage, which greatly improves the firmness of the house. Moreover, the thermal insulation and moisture retention performance is very good, better than brick and tile houses. The disadvantages are probably that the earthquake resistance is not good and it is afraid of flooding. After all, houses made of mud are not so reliable and afraid of being soaked in water for a long time. However, there seem to be few earthquakes in the German region. As for the problem of flooding, Marin dug many ditches in the North Sea Kingdom for drainage, which seems unlikely. In addition to adobe houses, the people of the North Sea Kingdom also use thatch to weave a kind of grass fabric called grass cover. This thing is like a blanket, and its function is to cover the body as a quilt to keep warm in winter. As time entered January 1514, Europe also ushered in the coldest month of the year. During this month, the temperature in Europe dropped sharply. In northern Germany, the temperature even dropped below -10 degrees. Such low temperatures have caused people to freeze to death in many places in Germany. Only in the North Sea Kingdom, because of the existence of adobe houses and kangs, few people were frozen to death. In order to ensure that the population does not decrease, Marin issued a nationwide order in December and January. The forests were opened, and farmers could enter the forests tax-free to cut firewood for heating. In other months, it is not allowed to enter the forest to cut firewood at will. Even if it is allowed, certain taxes must be paid. Of course, entering the forest to pick up dead branches and leaves as firewood is not restricted. In addition, the straw after the harvest of rye in rural areas is also the most important source of firewood for farmers. However, the 8 vassal states newly incorporated into the rule of the North Sea Kingdom seem to have encountered many problems. Many serfs froze to death in their own ventilated and leaky huts in the cold winter. According to statistics from local officials, hundreds of people froze to death in the 8 vassal states during the cold wave in early January, which shocked Marin. So Marin quickly ordered 3,000 engineering troops of the North Sea Kingdom, together with 10,000 civilians, to be divided into several groups to go deep into the disaster area to help the affected people repair their houses. Even build new adobe houses. Marin's move surprised the people of the 8 vassal states newly incorporated into the North Sea Kingdom. Hey, the nobles actually care about the lives of the poor. It's so strange. But after everyone watched strongly, they had to admit that the Grand Duke of the North Sea, Marin, was indeed a good noble who cared about the lives of the people. But they didn't know that this was the most basic official operation in later generations. If there is a disaster somewhere, the government will be scolded if it does not respond accordingly. In addition to helping the people repair their houses, Marin also purchased a batch of straw raincoats and straw covers from the original ruling area of Beihai state at a low price, and urgently sent them to the disaster area to provide them to the victims. In addition, the personnel who are good at making straw sandals among the engineering troops and civilians were asked to teach the local people how to make straw sandals, and even straw raincoats and straw covers. These measures and novel straw fabrics surprised the people of the 8 vassal states newly incorporated into Beihai state. They knew that Beihai state had a mysterious fertilizer that greatly increased the yield of crops, which surprised them. However, when it was cold in winter, the adobe houses and straw fabrics promoted by the Beihai state government overturned their cognition. They never thought that those thatch, which they never took seriously, could be made into so many practical things. In the cold winter, it can even save their lives. Even Marin didn't know that this wave of operations, which seemed normal to the officials in the future, actually helped him win the hearts of the people of the 8 newly annexed vassal states. Because those people knew that Marin was a good noble who cared about their lives. Marin, who inadvertently won the hearts of the people, didn't know this. At this time, he was in a blacksmith shop affiliated with the military outside the city of Auric, supervising blacksmiths, carpenters and potters to make what he needed. Yes, like this, you shape the furnace like this. Well, it doesn't need to be too big. Leave a hole here, the kind that can be blocked. Half a day later, a small furnace with a hole at the bottom came out of the furnace for firing pottery. There are movable handles on the stove. Then, Marin ordered the carpenter to make a set of wooden utensils that can be pedaled. After disassembling them, he handed them over to the blacksmiths transferred from the cannon foundry, asking them to use the sandbox casting method to produce iron tools of the same size as the wooden utensils. When the set of utensils that could be pedaled were successfully cast, Marin immediately ordered his men, "Quick, add water to the anthracite, mix it with yellow mud in a ratio of 8:2. Then, put it in this container. Use your foot to pedal. Loosen it, and pick out the things inside." Then, everyone saw a cylindrical black object with 12 holes on it. "Grand Duke, what is this?" The craftsmen were all very curious. Marin said mysteriously, "Don't ask, this is an epoch-making artifact." The craftsmen were all shocked, "My God, an artifact." Then, they became more curious. However, Marin didn't let them touch the black perforated cylinder, and they didn't dare to touch it casually. They could only tilt their heads and keep looking at it. When several new black perforated cylinders were almost dried, Marin called the craftsman to bring the small furnace that had been fired before. Then, he put the first piece of the black perforated cylinder into the blacksmith's furnace, and when the surface was burned red, he threw it into the bottom of the furnace, and then added 2 more pieces on it. "Grand Duke, what on earth is this?" a craftsman asked curiously. "Honeycomb coal." Chapter 15:12, There are no fans in Europe. Marin wanted to take out the honeycomb coal a long time ago, but considering the reaction of his ally, the Lamarck family, Marin postponed the time to take it out. After all, he exchanged a large area of land with coal mines in the Ruhr area from the Lamarck family. If he took out the honeycomb coal technology just after the territory was exchanged, anyone could see that he was pitting his teammates. Germany is a dangerous area that is used to forming groups and fighting in Europe. If someone finds out that he is pitting his teammates, Marin will be isolated and helpless in future fights. So, Marin endured it for many years. Originally, Marin planned to take out the honeycomb coal a few months ago. But by chance, he happened to meet the old Hoffman couple who wanted Simon to marry Princess Anna of the Lamarck family. Then, Marin had to postpone the plan again. It was not until Simon got married on November 11th last year that Marin felt that the time was ripe. Of course, it was not taken out immediately, and it needed to be paved. For example, a few days ago, 2 merchant ships returned from Panama, fully loaded with various goods purchased from the Ming dynasty. Along with the goods, in addition to several Iwenki falconers and the Saker falcon, there was also a letter sent back by Kong Tai. Of course, the letter was written in Chinese characters, and no one else could read it. Then, after Ma Lin pretended to read the letter, he happily announced loudly that Kong Tai had learned an incredible technology from the Ming Empire. What technology? Naturally, it was honeycomb coal. Then, Ma Lin found potters, carpenters, and blacksmiths to develop honeycomb coal stoves and handmade honeycomb coal presses. It's called research and development, but in fact, it's just Ma Lin directing the craftsman to restore his memory. The honeycomb coal stove is very easy to make. Let the potter pinch out the shape, throw it into the furnace to burn, and you will make a pottery honeycomb coal stove. It's very simple. The manual honeycomb coal press is a bit more troublesome. Ma Lin specially asked the carpenter to make a sample first, and then split it, and let the foundry blacksmith cast the parts by sandbox casting. The reason for choosing sandbox casting is for standardization. As long as the mold does not change, the size of the parts of the handmade honeycomb coal press cast by the sandbox is similar. Ma Lin tried it, and this handmade honeycomb coal press was similar to the one he used in his later life. In his previous life, his family lived not far from the Grand Canal, and they could easily buy coal shipped from Shuzhou. In order to save money, many families bought a handmade honeycomb coal press, a foot-operated type. The principle is very simple, that is, first use yellow mud and water to mix the anthracite powder into a dough shape. Then, the handmade honeycomb coal press with an opening at the bottom is pressed down, compacted, and then pressed with a few petals. At this time, there is a complete piece of honeycomb coal in the handmade honeycomb coal press with an opening at the bottom. Then, people will use their feet to step on a pedal at the top of the honeycomb coal container. The pedal is connected to a circular plate at the top of the press. There are 12 holes on the circular plate, which is mounted on 12 fixed iron rods with holes. But the circular plate can move up and down. When people step down from the upper pedal, the circular plate at the top of the press will completely press out the honeycomb coal that was originally pressed into the press. Then, this wet honeycomb coal will be taken to dry in the sun and air, and then transported and used. Of course, Marin was in a hurry, so he didn't dry it in the sun or blow it, and directly used the oven to dry the honeycomb coal. And his way of igniting was also very rough, throwing it directly into the charcoal pile on the red-hot blacksmith's furnace, and the outside of the honeycomb coal was burned red in a while. Then it was used specifically. It should be pointed out that the 12 holes of the upper and lower 3 honeycomb coals must be aligned. Otherwise, the upper honeycomb coal is not easy to ignite, and the honeycomb coal ignited below is also easy to extinguish or burn poorly. But whether it is putting the first red-hot honeycomb coal into the bottom of the furnace, or adding the next 2 honeycomb coals and aligning the 12 holes, it is impossible to use your hands. Especially, the first red-hot honeycomb coal. So, at this time, Marin needs another artifact, fire tongs. The fire tongs look like scissors, but the front part is not a pair of blades, but a pair of slender iron bars. Because there is no cutting edge, the 2 iron bars at the front end of the fire tongs can easily poke into 2 of the 12 holes of the honeycomb coal, and with a little force, you can clamp the honeycomb coal, lift it up and put it into the furnace, or clamp the burned honeycomb coal and replace it. Moreover, because the iron bar can penetrate the holes of the honeycomb coal, when adding the 2 pieces of honeycomb coal above, people can also use their eyes to see if the holes are aligned. As long as the front end of the fire tongs is extended and the aligned holes are found, the whole alignment problem can be completed. Therefore, to play with honeycomb coal, you must be equipped with a magic weapon, such as fire tongs, otherwise it will be more troublesome. For example, now the Ming dynasty uses honeycomb coal, there is no fire tongs, and you can only use an iron rod to poke down several times to complete the alignment of the upper and lower honeycomb coal, which is very inconvenient. After completing the ignition of the bottom honeycomb coal and the addition of the 2 pieces of honeycomb coal above, or only 1 piece, the next step is to put an iron pot or kettle on the top of the stove. To be honest, the firepower of the honeycomb coal stove seems to be a little bit insufficient, especially when cooking. Therefore, Marin did not think of using the honeycomb coal stove to cook, but put a 5-liter tin pot on it and started to boil water. In the early stage, because only the bottom piece of honeycomb coal was lit, the firepower was a little insufficient. Therefore, it is necessary to use a fan to fan the air at the bottom of the air inlet to speed up the burning of the honeycomb coal. Then, Marin discovered a strange situation: there are no fans in Europe. Don't laugh, Marin is not bragging, but there are really no fans in Europe in this era. Historically, it was in the 16th century that the Portuguese opened up the Ming dynasty route and discovered that there was such a thing as a fan in the world. You can search for European fans in the encyclopedia for details. Then, they brought it back to Europe. It is said that fans were introduced to England at the end of the 17th century. Moreover, this was due to the influence of the Portuguese Princess Catherine marrying Charles II. Because, at that time, what was introduced to England with Queen Catherine was not only fans, but also tea that had influenced Britain for hundreds of years. Of course, fans are not important, because Europe is not hot. Instead, tea broke out directly in England and became something that people loved. But in this time and space, the Portuguese had not established trade relations with the Ming dynasty, and only Marin had trade relations with the Ming dynasty. Therefore, at this time in Europe, there were no fans anywhere else. And Marin did not have the banana fan that the Chinese used to fan the honeycomb coal in the early days. In desperation, he had to take out an exquisitely crafted folding fan and let his men fan the air inlet under the honeycomb coal stove. Looking at the careless look of his guards, Marin said distressedly, "Be careful, that's a very precious fan." "How can it not be precious? There is an inscription by Li Dongyang on the folding fan." Although Marin got a few folding fans with inscriptions from Li Dongyang, this is also a treasure. Do you think the folding fan with the inscription of the Prime Minister of the Ming Empire is expensive? If Marin hadn't had a fan in his hand, he wouldn't have resorted to this desperate measure. Well, it seems that we have to import the palm leaf fans of the Ming dynasty. It seems that the palm leaf fans are made of fan palms. It seems that we have to notify Kong Tai to import a batch of fan palm seeds and plant them in savanna in southeastern North America. In fact, Marin can also make paper fans. However, paper fans are too expensive and most people can't afford them. The palm leaf fan is low cost, light, and has strong wind power, which is a good tool for fanning and starting fires. In the absence of a palm leaf fan, Marin thought about it and decided to let the carpenters make a few thinner square wooden boards. Fanning with this thin wooden board also produces wind, but it is not as light and strong as the palm leaf fan, but it can be barely used. Under Marin's extremely worried and painful eyes, Marin's guards fanned hard and finally boiled the first pot of hot water boiled in Europe with a honeycomb coal stove. Chapter 1513 Promotion of Broth and Honeycomb Briquette. Seeing that the kettle was steaming, Marin asked someone to take the kettle down, and replaced it with another tin kettle filled with cold water to seal the top of the honeycomb coal stove to prevent too much air from entering and causing the honeycomb coal to burn too quickly. Then, he asked someone to find a tea brick, break off a corner from it, put it in a large teacup to brew, and pour out the water. Then, he added some milk powder and maple syrup, covered the cup lid. A few minutes later, Marin tasted the hot milk tea comfortably and felt very refreshed. It's winter, don't drink a sip of hot tea too much. Drinking warm milk tea, Marin summed up an experience. If you want to prevent the tin kettle from drying out or even melting, you must add water in time. Or, simply prepare 2 tin kettles, and replace another one filled with cold water after a while, so that the tin kettle will not be burned dry. After the experiment was successful, Marin asked someone to bring several newly made honeycomb coal stoves and a cart of honeycomb coal back to the Palace of Auric. Next, Marin asked the craftsman to make several honeycomb coal stoves and a dozen tin kettles, and sent them to the front yard of the palace for special maids to look after. As a result, the bigwigs of the North Sea Kingdom who worked in the palace could drink steaming hot tea at any time. Drinking tea and reading newspapers in the office is the top treatment that only the engineers in later generations can enjoy. Well, the officials of the North Sea Kingdom Palace probably only lack one newspaper reading. The North Sea officials in the front yard thought that they were happy to drink hot tea at any time, but they didn't know that the backyard was even happier. Marin was not satisfied with drinking hot water. He asked the blacksmith to make a relatively high and large iron pot for boiling soup. Then, he threw it directly on the honeycomb coal stove and started to boil beef bone broth. The reason why Marin thought of boiling beef bone broth was because he accidentally remembered the pot of beef bone soup that was boiled for 3 days and 3 nights in the Korean drama Dae Jang Jeom that he watched in middle school. It just so happened that the North Sea Kingdom imported tens of thousands of cattle from the Crimean Khanate every year. Among them, thousands of bulls that were not strong enough to be kept as breeders were slaughtered for meat. Therefore, there were a lot of cattle bones in the North Sea Kingdom. So, Marin decided to recycle the waste and get the big cattle bones that the nobles of the North Sea Kingdom looked down upon, and boiled the legendary Dae Jang Jeom brand beef bone soup for Angela and Caesar. Marin first asked people to scald the selected fresh cattle bones with hot water in the royal kitchen to remove the blood, and then took them to the backyard and put them in the big soup pot on the honeycomb coal stove, and slowly boiled them with the fire of the honeycomb coal stove. In order to remove the special taste of beef, Marin also asked the maid to add ginger slices and radish slices to the pot. The ginger slices are for flavoring, and the radish slices are for absorbing the smell of cattle. After boiling for several hours, the radish slices used to absorb the taste were fished out. Then, the maids were divided into several shifts by Marin to guard the soup pot day and night. When you see foam floating on it, use a spoon to fish it out. Then, continue to watch the pot. If there is no fire, ask the guards to lift the soup pot and replace the honeycomb coal. Just like that, 3 days and 3 nights later, Marin took Angela and Caesar to drink the delicious and fragrant Dae Jang Jeom beef bone soup. Ah, so cool. The honeycomb coal stove is really good for making soup. Marin sighed. It's so cool to drink delicious beef bone soup in the winter. What? You said mutton soup. Why drink mutton soup when there is beef bone soup? Of course, you can try it. Anyway, Marin is a big boss now, and it's not a problem to set up an extra coal stove for cooking mutton soup in the palace. Later, Marin's family relied on the soup cooked by the honeycomb coal stove to let the whole family eat mutton soup steamed buns. Because of the wind direction in winter, the northwest wind brought the rich aroma of beef bone soup and mutton soup to the east side of the front yard of the palace, that is, the guard camp in the southeast of the palace. Khan, who was in charge of the guards in the front yard of the palace, smelled the aroma of beef bone soup and mutton soup, and followed the aroma to find it. Seeing that Marin's family was drinking beef bone broth and eating mutton soup steamed buns, Khan was angry. He didn't call me when there was something delicious. Then, he finished half a pot of beef bone broth and ate several bowls of mutton soup steamed buns, which made his stomach bulge. Marin was stunned. Damn, this is the reincarnation of a glutton. Thinking of the god of war Schwerengue, he was almost the same, eating with a bucket. Then, Marin was relieved. Since ancient times, there have been many gluttons among the fierce generals. What made Marin depressed was that Khan not only ate a lot, but also had a big mouth. The next day, Kohler, Schwartz, Saul, Hayter and other direct people ran to the backyard with their faces drooling to drink the soup. These country bumpkins had never seen the broth that had been boiled for several days in a row, and they were all shocked after drinking it. Then, they began to ask for the recipe of the broth. After all, in such a cold January, drinking a rich and fragrant soup is so refreshing. Marin told them how to make soup. Moreover, he gave each family a honeycomb coal stove and a lot of honeycomb coal. Then, in the next few days, the smell of rich and fragrant soup wafted through the homes of these guys. These guys also loved to show off. After successfully cooking beef bone soup and mutton soup, they began to entertain guests at home and invite people to drink soup. So, within a few days, all the nobles and officials in Auric City knew one thing: Grand Duke Marin got a lightweight coal-burning stove from the Eastern Empire, which could cook beef bone soup or mutton soup day and night. After 2 or 3 days of boiling, you can get a very delicious and fragrant soup. Then, many officials ran to the palace and asked Marin to reward a honeycomb coal stove. Marin was a little stunned. I clearly wanted to promote the honeycomb coal stove by boiling tea, but in the end, the honeycomb coal stove became popular because of boiling beef bone soup and mutton soup. Although the process was not quite the same as he imagined, Marin still accepted the reality. Boil the soup, anyway, it will expand the influence of honeycomb coal. So, Marin opened a store next to the Auric Palace, responsible for selling honeycomb coal stoves and honeycomb coal. Of course, fire tongs and thin wooden boards for fanning are also provided. The price of honeycomb coal stoves and matching fire tongs and thin wooden boards is not expensive, only slightly higher than the cost price. However, the honeycomb coal business is what Marin values most. Although the price of coal is very low, the mine price is only 2 shillings to 2.5 shillings per charter long, about 1.5 tons to 1.7 tons. The selling price is generally about 3 shillings to 4 shillings per charter long. Each piece of honeycomb coal weighs 2.5 kilograms, and the coal consumption does not exceed 2 kilograms. In other words, at least 1,500 pieces of honeycomb coal can be made from each charter long coal, calculated as 1.5 tons. Marin plans to sell it at a price of 25 pieces of honeycomb coal per pfennig, so 1.5 tons of coal can be sold at a price of 60 pfennigs, which is 5 shillings, which is 20% higher than the market price. Of course, this also includes the labor cost of making coal powder into honeycomb coal, which is not too bad. However, this is only for places with river transportation. Because the cost of river transportation is low, it can ensure that the price of coal will not rise much. But for those inland areas without river transportation, if honeycomb coal is transported by horse-drawn carriage, the price will definitely be more than this price, and it may rise sharply. Fortunately, the coal production in the North Sea is not too large. Even if only the surrounding areas of the main transportation waterways such as the Rhine, Ems, Weser, and Elbe can sell honeycomb coal, it is also a huge market. Therefore, this industry does not rely on profit margins, but on volume. Chapter 1514, The Württemberg Peasants' Uprising. It is very simple to burn honeycomb coal stoves, and it is also easy to make fire tongs. Making honeycomb coal is also super simple. Marin asked people to use the original wooden mold and the sandbox casting method to cast hundreds of sets of artificial honeycomb coal presses in one go. Then, the production of honeycomb coal became extremely simple. Moreover, it is fast and large in quantity. Because of the popularity of cooking soup, the honeycomb coal stove in Auric City quickly became popular. Even from aristocratic families to civilian families with good family conditions. Next, it will spread to other parts of the North Sea. Moreover, Marin is also ready to promote the use of honeycomb coal. So, he asked the potters to burn thousands of honeycomb coal stoves in one breath, and then started a free delivery. First of all, it is naturally to be given to the Pope's father-in-law who is far away in Rome. Good things must be considered first. Marin specially sent a ship with hundreds of honeycomb coal stoves and a full ship of honeycomb coal to be shipped to Rome. The cost of honeycomb coal is very low, but if it is transported by land, the cost will increase too much. Therefore, sea and land transportation is the cheapest. However, it takes a long time to transport honeycomb coal from the port of Emden to the port near Rome, which has to go around nearly half of Europe. In short, it will take at least a month for the Pope to use honeycomb coal. Then, His Majesty Emperor Maximilian I must also send it. Although the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire has no real power, he is nominally the highest secular monarch in the German region, and he still has to respect him on the surface. What's more, Maximilian I was Marin's benefactor. Therefore, it is only natural to send a set to the Emperor. However, it is much more difficult to send honeycomb coal stoves and honeycomb coal to Austria. After all, there are many mountain roads to Austria. Therefore, Marin did not transport much. Otherwise, the land freight is too high. In the future, even if His Majesty the Emperor wants to use honeycomb coal stoves, he still has to transport it through the mountain roads in southern Germany, and the cost is not low. Therefore, the sales of honeycomb coal in Austria are doomed to be bad. Ghent in the Netherlands, where the Emperor's son, Crown Prince Philip, lives, is a good place with well-developed water transportation, and a large number of honeycomb coals can be transported there at any time. This time, Marin also sent a batch over. Of course, Marin did not care how much honeycomb coal Prince Philip could consume, but the consumption capacity of the Netherlands. There are many wealthy businessmen in the Netherlands, and they are all good potential consumers. For example, in Flanders, although the wool textile industry was hit, it did not collapse. Therefore, the income of people there is much higher than that of other places, and the potential consumption capacity is also stronger. Marin sent a honeycomb coal stove to Crown Prince Philip to set an example for the Dutch nobles and wealthy businessmen to attract them to buy and use honeycomb coal. And when it was sent to the newly promoted in-law, Duke of Clever John II, John II's face really fell. He was not a fool. As soon as the envoy sent by Marin explained the use of the honeycomb coal stove, he knew that he had suffered a great loss. You know, there are many coal mines in the northern part of the Ruhr River in the north of the Mark state that he exchanged for Marin. However, he thought about it again. It seemed that he had looked down on those coal mines before, and those coal mines were not under his control. Of course, he had to collect taxes on the trade of coal mines, and the tax rate was 2 pfennigs per chartron coal, which was not too much. However, he still had a feeling of suffering a big loss after all. Because, from the introduction of the envoy, he could see that honeycomb coal must be on fire in the future. And the fire of honeycomb coal will inevitably lead to a sharp increase in coal mining. Even if he didn't have a coal mine, he could still get a lot of taxes with taxes. Of course, Marin was a kind man and would not let him suffer too much. No, the envoy sent by Marin immediately made a suggestion as an implicit compensation to John II. The envoy proposed that John II's Lamarck family could be the general sales agent of honeycomb coal in the Principality of Clever, Lower Gettys, Principality of Jülich and Principality of Berg under the control of the Lamarck family. Marin would supply John II with a large amount of honeycomb coal at a low price of 3 shillings per 1,500 pieces of honeycomb coal. Then, John II can sell it at a high price of more than 5 shillings. In this way, John II can obtain a high profit of 40% by acting as an agent for the sale of honeycomb coal, which is much more than collecting taxes. Suddenly, with huge benefits as a foundation, John II said nothing. As for Marin, because the cost of coal mining is very low and the production of honeycomb coal is simple, he did not lose money. At most, he gave up a lot of profits. Moreover, the sale of honeycomb coal in various vassal states does require the cooperation of these vassal states. Otherwise, it is difficult to open up the market. Therefore, no matter which vassal state sells honeycomb coal, it is inevitable to give concessions to local vassal states. At most, the interest rate given to ordinary vassal states is much lower than that given to John II, Duke of Clever. With Marin's large concessions as a foundation, John II was immediately enthusiastic about the promotion of honeycomb coal. After all, he can make a profit of 2 shillings for every 1,500 honeycomb coals sold. How could he not be happy with such a good thing? Marin also gave him a very high profit margin, which was equivalent to only giving him 60% of the market price for wholesale. And for other princes, the minimum must be 80% of the market price. Just when Marin was busy promoting honeycomb coal stoves, a message suddenly came from the south that a large-scale peasant uprising broke out in the Duchy of Württemberg in the south. In fact, the peasant uprising in the Duchy of Württemberg was nothing new. Because, since the Huss War that broke out in the early 15th century, the German region has experienced many peasant uprisings. For example, in 1476, a peasant uprising broke out in Franconia. However, because of the leak, the leader, Hans the drummer, was arrested before the peasant uprising of tens of thousands of people began. Although a large uprising of 16,000 people broke out later, because the leader was arrested in advance, the peasants were leaderless and were naturally defeated by the nobles. Subsequently, a peasant uprising broke out in Carinthia in 1478, a peasant uprising broke out in Aargau in 1492, a peasant uprising broke out in Alsace in 1493, and a peasant uprising broke out in Speyer in 1502. These uprisings broke out in southern Germany, and most of them were launched in the name of the Shoe Club. The so-called Shoe Club is actually an organization similar to the Tiandihui in the Qing dynasty. Just last year, in 1513, a Shoe Club peasant uprising of several thousand people broke out in the Breisgau area. Breisgau is adjacent to the canton of Zurich in northeastern Switzerland and belongs to the Swabian League. It is ruled by several lords who are attached to the Habsburg family. Originally in history, the local nobles were unable to cope with this peasant uprising, and it was the neighboring canton of Zurich that sent Swiss mercenaries to help suppress it. In this time and space, the canton of Zurich has been occupied by the Habsburg family, and the lords of Breisgau naturally do not need to seek help from Swiss mercenaries, but directly seek help from the Habsburg family. Then, Frundsberg randomly sent 3,000 people to suppress the uprising. Moreover, 5,000 rebellious peasants were captured. As for the leaders, hundreds of them were hanged by the Habsburg family. But unexpectedly, just as the peasant uprising in Breisgau was suppressed, the neighboring country to the northeast of Breisgau, the Duchy of Württemberg, also broke out in the Poor Conrad peasant uprising. Originally in history, this uprising had only about 3,000 to 5,000 peasants participating. But due to the emergence and intervention of Marin, a large number of mountain people in the mountainous areas of the Duchy of Württemberg were recruited by Marin. As a result, the extravagant Duke Ulrich of Württemberg could only impose more heavy taxes on the peasants of Württemberg. Then, the oppressed peasants were naturally dissatisfied, and the number of participants in this peasant uprising, which originally had a maximum of 5,000 people, reached more than 8,000. When the news came, 8,000 Württemberg peasants had already surrounded the city of Stuttgart. Chapter 1515, The Peasant Rebellion Prisoners of War. The peasant uprising that broke out in Württemberg was related to the arbitrary increase of new taxes by Duke Ulrich of Württemberg. This guy lived a luxurious life and was extravagant. From 1498 to the beginning of 1514, he had only succeeded to the throne for 15 years, but he actually owed a huge debt of 1 million golden gold coins. In order to repay foreign debts, Duke Ulrich had to invent new taxes to exploit the farmers of Württemberg. He came up with a new wine tax, meat tax, and bread tax. In other words, the people of Württemberg had to pay taxes for eating and drinking. Then, he also came up with something called capital tax, stipulating that for every commodity worth 1 gulden, a capital tax of 1 pfennig must be paid to him. These heavy taxes immediately angered the farmers of Württemberg, so under the leadership of the secret organization, Poor Conrad, the peasants decided to launch an uprising. About 8,000 peasants, armed with simple farm tools such as sickles and shovels, surrounded the city of Stuttgart under the leadership of the knife maker Caspar, demanding the abolition of the newly added heavy taxes. When Duke Ulrich saw that the peasants were powerful, he pretended to be submissive and asked his officials to deceive the peasants, saying that he was willing to abolish the new taxes. But behind the scenes, he was summoning the nobles and knights in the principality to prepare for the suppression. Caspar didn't believe Duke Ulrich's words at all, but the peasants he brought were relatively simple and actually believed Ulrich's lies. After getting the promise to abolish the new taxes, the peasants happily put down their sickles and hoes and went back to farm. In desperation, Caspar had to lie dormant with the core leadership of the rebels for a while. At the same time, closely monitor the actions of Duke Ulrich. After the news was passed back to Ulrich, Marin immediately remembered it seems that the works of the two great men Marx and Engels in later generations mentioned the many peasant wars that broke out in Germany in the 15th and 16th centuries. According to the two big guys, Marin and Engels, Württemberg in this era was one of the most populous vassal states, with a population of 600,000 to 700,000 people. Of course, this does not include the North Sea Kingdom of Marin, the time traveler. Moreover, Württemberg has so many people, but the land area is only 10,000 square kilometers. Moreover, most of it is mountainous and black forests. Unlike the North Sea Kingdom, although the population is only more than twice that of the Duchy of Württemberg, the land area is as high as more than 100,000 square kilometers. Therefore, the peasants in the Duchy of Württemberg are very miserable. Because there is not much arable land in the territory, each serf can cultivate less land, which is far worse than the serfs in the North Sea, but they have to bear the main part of the high taxes of Duke Ulrich. In desperation, they were led by the Poor Conrad organization and prepared to launch an uprising. But the German peasant rebels were very naive. They launched an uprising not like the Chinese peasant rebels to fight for the country, but just to volunteer to the lords, trying to force the lords to abolish unreasonable taxes. Such a naive approach must be taught a lesson. Unlike the peasant rebels in China, who knew from Chen Sheng and Wu Guang that kings, princes, generals and ministers are of different species. One just wanted to petition, while the other had a clear goal to fight for the world. The impact of the two is obvious. Therefore, because they were too naive, the German Peasant War broke out many times, and each time it was suppressed. Because they did not know how to kill the nobles and eliminate the opponent's living forces when they had an advantage, but waited foolishly until the nobles gathered enough power to suppress them. The reason why peasant uprisings occurred frequently from the 15th to the 16th century was closely related to the increase in population in the German region. Since the Black Death ended in the 14th century, in the 15th century, although the Black Death still broke out from time to time, it was on a smaller scale, and there were few large-scale epidemics sweeping across Europe. Against this background, the population in the German region began to grow steadily. But the problem is that the population has increased, but the land has not increased. Coupled with the touching low yield of European agriculture, it is simply not enough to feed too many people. Of course, if Ulrich collected less taxes, everyone could barely get by. But this guy owed 1 million golden gold coins after being a duke for 15 years, and had to impose heavy taxes on the people to make up for the deficit. Then, naturally, everyone couldn't live. The peasant uprising in Württemberg has temporarily subsided, but Marin knows that the war will definitely be reignited. However, the news from Breisgau has boosted Marin's spirits. The lord there actually contacted the North Sea Kingdom's recruiting envoy in Strasbourg, Alsace, next to Breisgau, to ask if he wanted the captured uprising peasants. The Breisgau area is similar to the Württemberg area, and now there are many people and little land. Under the oppression of the lords, the serfs also have a hard life. After capturing thousands of peasants in uniform, several local lords executed hundreds of leaders. But the remaining 5,000 peasant captives made them very embarrassed. Keeping these people is a hidden danger. Moreover, there is not enough land for so many peasants to grow. But if they are killed, it would be a pity and ruin their reputation. So, after a discussion, several lords suddenly remembered that Marin had been recruiting immigrants. The Swabian alliance, where Breisgau was located, was one of the few German princes that was friendly to Marin. After all, everyone was on the emperor's side. Therefore, they planned to send someone to ask Marin whether he was willing to buy these people for a fee. After all, if these originally useless people could be exchanged for money and food from Marin, it would be absolutely cost-effective. And if these people were kept in their hands, they would have to consume food every day to feed them. Selling prisoners of war. After listening to Kohler's report, Marin widened his eyes. Then, he took a breath and asked, "How many peasant prisoners do they have? How much are they asking?" Kohler flipped through the intelligence and replied, "They have about 5,000 peasant prisoners. Including the families of these farmers, there are probably more than 20,000 people. But those lords probably won't sell all 5,000 peasants. It seems that they have selected 2,000 more honest and obedient farmers. The remaining 3,000 more troublesome farmers, the lords intend to sell them to you. As for the asking price, it seems to be 30 gold coins per family. However, children over 5 years old are not included. Those children are very popular in the market and are charged separately. Only children under 5 years old will be given away as a gift because it is uncertain whether they can survive the infancy. 3,000 farmers, including family members, that's more than 10,000 people, right? Okay, tell them, we bought it. But I require that more than half of the funds be replaced by food. In addition, try to buy all the farmers' children, especially those who are about 10 years old. These children will grow up to be adults in a few years. Okay, I'll arrange it right away." Chapter 15:16, Gold Coins Shine. After receiving Marin's instructions, Kohler personally rode south. By changing horses along the way, he arrived in the Breisgau area in a few days and negotiated with several local lords in Freiburg. After some bargaining, Kohler agreed to pay 30 gold coins to each family with a strong man, and must include children under 8 years old. As for children over 8 years old, boys are 10 golden gold coins each and girls are 5 gold coins. Of course, the price of beautiful girls over 10 years old is higher than that of boys. The reason why ordinary boys are twice as expensive as girls is that this era is an agricultural society. In an agricultural society, men are the backbone. After all, women can't do many heavy jobs in the farmland. Therefore, in rural areas where farming is the main thing, it is normal to favor boys over girls, and it is abnormal to have gender equality. In cities, because there is no heavy farm work, women have a much higher status than rural women. However, girls over 10 years old are different. In Europe at this time, girls generally have to get married at the age of 15. Girls over 10 years old can do that after raising them for a few years. Therefore, the price of beautiful girls is much higher than that of boys who can be used as laborers after being raised for a few years. Especially those wretched nobles would not be willing to sell those beautiful girls. Of course, Kohler did not want to buy those beautiful girls. Why? He was to increase the population of the North Sea Kingdom, not to pimp for the nobles of the North Sea Kingdom. Therefore, Kohler only bought 1,000 boys and 700 girls. All in all, the North Sea Kingdom needs to pay 103,500 gold coins. These fees are not all in cash, and more than half of them will be paid in the form of grain. Moreover, Breisgau is on the edge of Alsace, close to the upper reaches of the Rhine, but it is navigable. Therefore, the North Sea Kingdom will use inland paddle boats to transport more than 50,000 gold coins worth of grain through inland river transportation. In addition, Kohler also negotiated with several lords to discuss using sugar cane and ginger produced in Granada, as well as spirits produced in the North Sea Kingdom to offset part of the payment. Several lords happened to have a need for this, and then more than 10,000 gold coins were used to offset the cost with sugar, ginger and liquor. After the negotiation, Kohler did not return home immediately, but instead went to the Duchy of Württemberg northeast of Breisgau to visit Duke Ulrich, an ally of the Habsburg family. Kohler brought 100 bottles of Royal Salute liquor, a specialty of the North Sea, which is actually ergotu mixed with boiled water and maple syrup. However, because of the addition of maple syrup, the Royal Salute tastes good and is very popular among European nobles. Now, it is an expensive luxury in Europe, and a bottle is worth several gold coins. 100 bottles of Royal Salute, it is very face-saving to take them out, just like carrying 100 bottles of Mutai in later generations. Sure enough, Duke Ulrich, who likes to enjoy, likes this gift very much. Nonsense, who in later generations would not like to bring 100 bottles of Mutai to the door? If you can accept it. Because of these 100 bottles of Royal Salute, Kohler himself also received the courtesy of Ulrich, Duke of Württemberg. Although Kohler is already the Count of the Grand Duchy of the North Sea, this is a title within the Principality, not an imperial title recognized by all of Europe. Therefore, Kohler is generally regarded as having a status similar to that of an imperial baron in other principalities. As a duke of a principality, Ulrich is the top boss in Germany. For a count of a principality like Kohler, it is generally only necessary to send the prime minister to greet him. But this time, because Kohler's gift was very much to his liking, he personally received Kohler and had a cordial conversation with Kohler in the reception room. During the conversation, Kohler deliberately leaked the purpose of his trip and told Duke Ulrich about the purchase of 3,000 captured farmers from Breisgau for more than 100,000 gold coins. Then, Kohler found that Duke Ulrich's saliva was falling before he finished his introduction. More than 100,000 gold coins. The Duke was a little dumbfounded. He really didn't expect that those country mud legs could be exchanged for gold coins. This is incredible. Why is the Duke so sensitive to gold coins? Because what he lacks most is gold coins. In these 15 years of Duke career, Ulrich owed a huge debt of 1 million gold coins. Therefore, Ulrich was eager to get a channel to make money. And squeezing farmers was also his last resort. After all, Württemberg has many mountains and black forests, and it is really not a place with rich products. However, when it comes to population, the population of the Principality of Württemberg can rank among the top in Germany. There are definitely more people and less land. Speaking of which, the area of Württemberg is actually quite large, with more than 10,000 square kilometers, which is comparable to Israel in later generations. And Israel has a population of 8 million. Of course, this cannot be compared. Israel produces 50 tons of tomatoes per mu, and is a super agricultural power. What about Württemberg? Although the area is not less than Israel, there are many mountains, forests and less arable land. Moreover, the yield per mu is only about 100 pounds, which can't support too many people. Therefore, even Ulrich, the Duke of Württemberg, dislikes the large population in the country. In fact, Marin has recruited soldiers from the Principality of Württemberg many times before, recruiting about 10,000 Württemberg mountain people as soldiers. Including their families, it is enough for tens of thousands of people. However, this is not good for Duke Ulrich. Because he can't collect much tax from those poor mountain people. Moreover, the places with a large population in Württemberg are those agricultural areas, not mountainous areas. Therefore, Marin's previous recruitment of soldiers did not relieve the pressure on the rural areas of Württemberg. Even because of the departure of the mountain people, the burden on the farmers is heavier. However, Duke Ulrich still thinks that the population is too large. Now, there are still more than 600,000 people in the Principality of Württemberg. If the mountain people recruited by Marin before are included, the total population is estimated to exceed 700,000. But Duke Ulrich thinks that since there is so little arable land in Württemberg and so many useless mountains, a population of about 500,000 is enough. Even 500,000 is too much. In recent years, many surplus serfs in Württemberg have moved out to make a living in cities in other principalities. He doesn't care about these. Anyway, whether these people leave or not, they can't bring him any benefits. If they don't leave, there is no extra arable land for them to farm. If they leave, he won't be able to collect taxes after leaving Württemberg. But Kohler's words today seem to open a window for him. It turns out that those poor guys can also be sold for money. The gold coins in Duke Ulrich's eyes were shining at this time. Chapter 15-17, Bewitching. Duke Ulrich of Württemberg was a little bit obsessed for a while, and his eyes were full of gold coins. If he could sell hundreds of thousands of people to the rich man Marin, wouldn't he be able to get more than 1 million gold coins in exchange? Then, all his debts would be gone. Duke Ulrich's mouth was drooling again. But Duke Ulrich suddenly remembered that it seemed that the Holy See strictly prohibited human trafficking. So, he hesitated again. As the Duke of Württemberg, Ulrich knew very well that the population of Württemberg was a bit too much. This is not a fertile place. The reason why there are so many people is that the previous Black Death did not affect this mountainous and remote area. Then, over a long period of time, the population naturally increased gradually. In fact, not only the Württemberg region, but most parts of Germany have the problem of surplus population, which has not been well solved. Therefore, starting from the Hussite War in the early 15th century, peasant riots would occur after a period of time. Moreover, this problem is most serious in the mountainous areas in southern Germany. If it is in the northern plains, it is not a bad thing to have more people. At most, they can reclaim wasteland. There is plenty of land. But in the southern mountains, it is a disaster if the population increases. After all, it is not easy to grow crops in the mountains. If the population increases, problems will naturally arise. Of course, this is also related to the fact that European agricultural technology has always been very bad. For example, the Duchy of Württemberg, such a large territory, even if there are many mountains, if it is replaced with the agricultural level of ancient China, it is not a problem to support a population of 2 million. But the problem is that the agricultural technology here is very bad, and it is difficult to support a population of 600,000 or 700,000. If you have studied the history of the German peasant uprising, you will find that most of the peasant uprisings at that time occurred in the southern region. There are mountains everywhere, and it is extremely difficult to divert water for irrigation, and it is difficult to reclaim wasteland. Therefore, once the population increases, everyone will have no chance to survive. In the northern region, because there are plains everywhere, there are more people and they go to reclaim wasteland, so there is no peasant uprising. Speaking of which, the scale of this Württemberg peasant uprising, including the previous peasant uprising in Breisgau, is not large, and none of them exceeded 10,000 people. Marin, a history professional, clearly remembers that the largest peasant uprising in German history took place in 1524, which was the peasant uprising led by Moenzer. The 1524 peasant uprising led by Moenzer took place in the area near Nuremberg, which is also in the southern region. At that time, the total scale of the peasant uprising reached tens of thousands of people. Among them, the most influential was the uprising army led by Moenzer. However, because tens of thousands of peasant uprisings failed to merge, they were eventually defeated one by the coalition forces formed by the princes. The most ridiculous thing was the 180,000-strong uprising army that occupied Freiburg. Because after occupying Freiburg, the peasants of the uprising army grabbed enough wealth in Freiburg. Then, most of the peasants felt that they had enough, so they dispersed on their own and went back to their hometowns to farm. In the end, only Moenzer's 8,000-strong peasant uprising army fought bravely, but was outnumbered and ultimately failed. Of course, Moenzer was not a peasant. He was a low-level priest who had attended the University of Leipzig, which was run by the church. He also studied theology and philosophy at the University of Frankfurt and the University of Mainz. He was a cultured person. The peasant uprising army generally lacked the kind of literati with bad intentions. Li Zicheng was able to succeed because of the assistance of literati such as Li Yan and Niu Jingxing. Without the help of counselors, the peasant uprising would have been difficult to succeed. However, when Minzer was young, his father was persecuted and hanged by local nobles. Therefore, he had planted the seeds of hatred for nobles in his heart since he was a child. In the German peasant uprising in 1524, the peasant uprising army he was in became more powerful than other peasant uprising armies because of his insightful leader. Of course, Minzer did not have much political skills and failed to annex other peasant uprising armies in time. If he could have all the tens of thousands of peasant uprising armies in his hands, then history might have been rewritten. Moreover, it is said that Minzer was also a fan of Martin Luther, who initiated the Reformation. However, Moenzer was more radical than Martin Luther. He advocated not only anti-Catholicism, but also revolution with the nobles. Martin Luther was a smart man and knew that he could not offend both the nobles and the church at the same time, so the two broke up. Then, Moenzer failed and was killed in the peasant uprising, while Martin Luther escaped the persecution of the Holy See under the protection of the noble leader Frederick III. At this time, Moenzer, who was still a teacher and priest in the city of Eilben, did not know that a big devil named Marin was already planning to take advantage of him. Marin was thinking whether to add fuel to the flames in Moenzer's peasant uprising and make things bigger. Then, take the opportunity to reap the benefits of the fishermen. There are tens of thousands of peasants. Wouldn't it be great if they were brought over? One peasant reclaimed 100 acres of wasteland, and tens of thousands of peasants would be millions of acres. And in the Stuttgart Palace, Duke Ulrich of Württemberg was also imagining the future. However, hesitation flashed in his eyes from time to time. After all, actively selling the people under his rule seems to violate church rules. Kohler saw his melancholy, so he deliberately asked questions. When he learned about Duke Ulrich's concerns, he immediately gave an idea. "Your Excellency the Duke, I heard that there was a peasant uprising in your country this time. Why? What do you think?" Duke Ulrich tilted his head and looked at Kohler. Kohler smiled and said, "My Lord Duke, the Church certainly does not allow human trafficking. However, it does not prohibit the exile of rebels." Duke Ulrich nodded, "That's right, Europe has always had a tradition of exiling ordinary rebels. As for the gay rebels, they were all hanged or burned to death. If you want to exchange those rebels for money, you can completely entrust them to our Grand Duke for exile on the charge of exile. Then, we will pay them privately and never mention any transactions. Then, no one will accuse you of human trafficking. Exile? Ask Grand Duke Marin to help exile the rebels. This idea sounds good." In fact, Marin had discussed with Kohler before, and the American continent does need immigrants to develop. But the problem is that he had sent people to various places to recruit immigrants. But when those German farmers heard that they were going to the wild continent, America, they all refused. But if they immigrated to the North Sea country, they would be very happy. And Marin couldn't force them to immigrate, so he was helpless. Therefore, the main population of the current American colonies is still the tens of thousands of English victims. At the beginning, during the Civil War in England, tens of thousands of victims had nothing to eat. Marin took the opportunity to send ships to send them to America, promising to give them enough food. However, if he went to southern Germany to recruit immigrants, it would be more difficult. Although they are poor, they are not to the point where they can't survive. You can ask them to immigrate to the North Sea country as serfs, but if you ask them to immigrate to the legendary, wild continent, everyone will never agree. This is also Marin's fault. In order to scare other European countries and avoid competition, America was promoted as a little terrifying. As a result, few people are willing to immigrate to America now, which makes Marin very headache. However, the batch of peasant rebel prisoners of war purchased from Breisgau is different. They are sinners and have no choice. Marin can completely use the name of helping to exile to the wild continent to ship these prisoners of war, including their families, to the American colonies. Because they were exiled criminals, these people had no right to refuse, and there was no need to reason with them, which made it very hassle-free. After talking with the lords of the Breisgau area, Kohler ran over to Lord Ulrich, Duke of Württemberg. "Your Excellency Duke, I think that group of rebellious peasants will definitely not give up. It is actually Duke Ulrich who will not give up, but Kohler cannot say that. If they riot again, you don't have to rush to defeat them. Send troops to drive them away first. Let them follow the route you set for them and sweep through some villages in some places. Then, their team will expand, and more peasants will participate. At that time, you will send troops to defeat and capture them. In this way, you can get as many prisoners of war as possible. Our Grand Duke is happy to buy these people, one hand for money and the other hand for people, and we will never default. Okay, let's do as you say. I'm not in a hurry to suppress that group of peasants. However, my military strength is limited. What if there are too many peasants and we can't beat them?" Duke Ulrich of Württemberg gritted his teeth and made up his mind, and asked worriedly. Kohler smiled and said, please rest assured, Your Excellency the Duke. Don't forget how our Grand Duke got started. We can secretly send a group of elite troops, disguised as ordinary mercenaries, to help you suppress those rebellious farmers. We will never let the situation get out of control. Okay, deal. The poor Duke Ulrich nodded immediately. Chapter 1518, Lack of Money. Under normal circumstances, Duke Ulrich, the Lord, could not arrest the people under his rule at will. Unless those people violated the law or resisted taxes. Generally speaking, most of the peasants arrested in this era were because of tax resistance. After all, the nobles were poor, and the serfs were even poorer. Of course, the nobles also had the right to arrest those peasants who dared to rebel. They could even be hanged. But there was no precedent in Europe for killing all the rebels. At most, the leaders would be hanged or burned to death. As for most of the people who followed the rebellion, they were generally either exiled or fined a large sum of money. As for confiscating all property, that was a basic operation. As for killing them all like Bai Qi, it was unlikely. Even in ancient China, which was really unscrupulous, Bai Qi's behavior was condemned. What's more, in Christian doctrine, forgiveness is an important basic principle. But the nobles also have their own ways. I can't kill those who followed the rebellion, but I can exile them. The Tsar, the most brutal monarch in Europe in later generations, especially liked to exile opponents to the extremely cold Siberia, leaving them on the verge of freezing to death. The Soviet Union later inherited this policy, and a large number of prisoners were exiled to Siberia, even the last Tsar's family was among them. Of course, the British did the same. Back then, after the British occupied the east coast of North America, they also regarded North America as a place of exile. The first immigrants to North America were composed of Puritans and exiles. Because they are the descendants of rebellion, the American people in later generations are very rebellious and eccentric. But for the German princes, it seems unlikely to exile prisoners. Because everyone's territory is very small, there is really no wasteland to exile prisoners. Even the peasant uprisings that came one after another were because there was not enough land to be divided. Where was there room for exiling prisoners? And staying in the country, there was no extra land to be distributed to them. So, before Marin wanted to buy the prisoners of the peasant uprising army, several lords of Brishgard were actually very troubled by the disposal of those peasant prisoners. So they wanted to secretly sell people to Marin. But selling people is illegal, and it would be unlucky if it was spread out. Fortunately, Marin was knowledgeable and immediately came up with the excuse of exile on behalf of others to solve all the problems. Moreover, exiling those rebels to the wild continent where venomous snakes, poisonous mosquitoes, and beasts are rampant, can also be regarded as a deterrent to the peasants who dare to participate in the uprising. According to the scale of the previous peasant uprising, about 8,000 strong peasants participated in the uprising. If the army is mobilized to catch them all in one fell swoop, less than 8,000 prisoners of war can be obtained. But Marin's appetite is big, and Duke Ulrich is also not satisfied with just this little commodity. Therefore, based on the characteristics of the peasant uprising army that likes to drag the peasants who pass by, Marin helped Duke Ulrich develop a set of disasters and, borrowing a knife to kill, poisonous schemes. The so-called disasters is to use the methods of blocking and driving away to drive the peasant uprising army to where the behind-the-scenes planners want them to go. As long as they are not in their own territory, they can do whatever they want. Killing with a borrowed knife is more terrible. These peasant rebels are not gentlemen who know etiquette, but bandits who plunder everywhere. Once they are driven to certain manors, looting the manor's food and wealth is a basic operation. Even the owner of the manor may be killed. Once the small noble who is the owner of the manor is killed, then Duke Ulrich, as the monarch of the vassal state, has a reason to take the manor for himself. In this way, after the peasant uprising is quelled, Duke Ulrich can make a fortune by taking back many manors whose owners have died. Moreover, all the property robbed by the peasant rebels before will also be seized by Duke Ulrich's army. In addition to a small part to be distributed to the soldiers of the army, most of it will also belong to Duke Ulrich. Therefore, if Duke Ulrich operates well in this peasant uprising, he can make a fortune. Duke Ulrich obviously realized this, so after Kohler explained it to him, he was so excited that he couldn't help himself. However, he ultimately had no confidence in how to make the peasant rebels roam according to his settings. After all, you must first be able to stop the peasant rebels' attacks. If you can't stop them, the peasant army will go wherever they want, and they may specifically harm Ulrich's own fiefdom. If you are not careful, this matter may go wrong and then pit yourself to death. Fortunately, Kohler expressed his position on behalf of Marin, expressing his willingness to send 7,000 mercenaries to the Duchy of Württemberg as ordinary mercenaries. Then, a defensive fortress was built in the border area of Duke Ulrich's own fiefdom to prevent the peasant rebels from roaming into the Duke's own fiefdom. Of course, the interests of the nobles under the Duke's confidence must also be taken into account. Then, as for the interests of other nobles, Duke Ulrich said I don't care about him. Moreover, the more unlucky the nobles who are not on his side are, the happier he is. Because the interests lost by those unlucky nobles will mostly belong to him in the end. After the two sides reached an agreement, Kohler rushed back without stopping. According to the agreement reached by both parties, after Kohler returns, he will send 7,000 elite soldiers to build a bunker similar to the noble turret in the border area of Duke Ulrich's fiefdom to guard the safety of the Duke's private territory. Of course, some people will help guard the fiefdom of the Duke's close ministers and the nobles who support the Duke. At the same time, Duke Ulrich will also organize his nobles to gather troops and horses in the country to drive away the peasant uprising army according to the plan. The peasant uprising army will roam along the route he set and harm the territories of the nobles who are not on the right path with the Duke. In the end, the ending is that the peasant army will harm the small nobles and landlords along the way according to the route set by the Duke, but in the end it will be black eat black by Duke Ulrich. Marin, on the other hand, got a population of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands as he wished, which will be used to develop the American colonies. According to Marin's estimate, he will be able to get at least tens of thousands of immigrants after this uprising. With these people, he will not only develop the land of New Jersey in the future. He could have expanded inland to the west, or established colonies in other coastal areas. But in order to prevent the colonies from being interfered with by others, Marin preferred to place these tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of immigrants on the coastal line, so as to completely control the eastern coast of the United States in the future, and not give other countries the opportunity to take advantage of the gaps. But the North American colonies are so large that tens of thousands of people can't make any waves at all. So Marin made up his mind this time he had to find a way to get more than 100,000 people from the Duchy of Württemberg, even if it cost a high price. But as soon as he made up his mind, he realized a serious problem. It seemed that he didn't have much money in his hands. Of course, this doesn't mean that Marin is poor. Marin is very rich, but most of his property is in the form of food and liquor. Marin really wants to sell all these properties and exchange them for cash. However, the amount of gold and silver in Europe is limited, and a lot of money is spent every year to purchase Indian spices and other types of Middle Eastern goods. So Europe is now short of money. Similarly, Marin is also short of money. Just like this time when buying people, although Marin only needs to pay less than half in cash, the rest is paid with food and other goods. But if the total population reaches hundreds of thousands, the total transaction amount may reach hundreds of thousands of gold coins. Even if less than half needs to be paid in cash, it will still cost hundreds of thousands of gold coins in cash. To be honest, it's not that Marin can't come up with so much money. But after taking out this money, he doesn't have much cash in his hands. As a big country with more than 2 million people, how can the court of the Grand Duchy of the North Sea have no money? So, Marin felt that he was really short of money. Chapter 1519, Sending Troops to Japan. Under normal circumstances, Duke Ulrich, the Lord, cannot arrest the people under his rule at will. Unless those people violate the law or resist taxes. Generally speaking, most of the peasants arrested in this era are because of tax resistance. After all, the nobles are poor, and the serfs are even poorer. Of course, the nobles also have the right to arrest those peasants who dare to rebel. Even, they can hang them. But there is no precedent in Europe to kill all the rebels. At most, the leaders will be hanged or burned to death. As for most of the people who followed the rebellion, they were generally either exiled or fined a large sum of money. As for confiscating all property, that is a basic operation. As for killing them all like Bai Qi, it is unlikely. Even in ancient China, which was really unscrupulous, Bai Qi's behavior was condemned. What's more, in Christian doctrine, forgiveness is an important basic principle. But the nobles also have their own way. I can't kill those who followed the rebellion, but I can exile them. The Tsar, the most brutal monarch in later Europe, especially liked to exile opponents to the extremely cold Siberia, leaving them on the verge of freezing to death. The later Soviet Union also inherited this policy, and a large number of prisoners were exiled to Siberia. Even the last Tsar's family was among them. Of course, the British did the same. Back then, after the British occupied the east coast of North America, they also regarded North America as a place of exile. The first immigrants to North America were composed of Puritans and exiles. Because they are the descendants of rebellion, the American people in later generations are very rebellious and perverse. But for the German princes, it seems unlikely to exile prisoners. Because everyone's territory is very small, there is really no wasteland to exile prisoners. Even, the peasant uprisings that came one after another were because there was not enough land to be divided. Where was the space for exiling prisoners? And there was no extra land to be distributed to them in the country. Therefore, before Marin wanted to buy the prisoners of the peasant uprising army, several lords of Brishgale were actually very troubled by the disposal of the peasant prisoners. So they wanted to sell people to Marin secretly. But selling people is illegal, and it will be unlucky if it is spread out. Fortunately, Marin was knowledgeable and immediately came up with the excuse of exile on behalf of others to solve all the problems. Moreover, exiling those rebels to the wild continent where venomous snakes, poisonous mosquitoes, and beasts are rampant, can also be regarded as a deterrent to the peasants who dared to participate in the uprising. According to the scale of the previous peasant uprising, about 8,000 strong peasants participated in the uprising. If the army is mobilized to catch them all in one fell swoop, less than 8,000 prisoners of war can be obtained. But Marin's appetite is very big, and Duke Ulrich is also not satisfied with just this little commodity. Therefore, based on the characteristics of the peasant uprising army that they like to drag along the peasants wherever they pass, Marin helped Duke Ulrich develop a set of diverting the trouble to the east and killing with a borrowed knife. The so-called diverting the trouble to the east is to use the methods of blocking and driving away to drive the peasant uprising army to where the behind-the-scenes planners want them to go. As long as it is not in their own territory, they can do whatever they want. And, killing with a borrowed knife is more terrible. These peasant uprisings are not gentlemen who know etiquette, but bandits who plunder everywhere. Once they are driven to certain manors, looting the food and wealth of the manor is a basic operation. Even the owner of the manor may be killed. Once the small noble who is the owner of the manor is killed, then Duke Ulrich, as the monarch of the vassal state, has a reason to take over the manor. In this way, after the peasant uprising is quelled, Duke Ulrich can make a fortune by taking back many manors whose owners have died. Moreover, all the property that the peasant rebels had previously robbed would also be seized by Duke Ulrich's army. In addition to a small portion to be distributed to the soldiers of the army, most of it also belonged to Duke Ulrich. Therefore, if Duke Ulrich operated this peasant uprising well, he could make a fortune. Duke Ulrich obviously realized this, so after Kohler explained it to him, he was so excited that he couldn't help himself. However, he finally had no confidence in how to let the peasant rebels roam according to his settings. After all, you must first be able to stop the attack of the peasant rebels. If you can't stop it, the peasant army will go wherever they want, and they may specifically harm Ulrich's own fiefdom. If you are not careful, this matter may go wrong, and then you will be pitted to death. Fortunately, Kohler expressed his attitude on behalf of Marin, expressing his willingness to send 7,000 mercenaries to the Duchy of Württemberg as ordinary mercenaries. Then, a defensive fortress was built on the border of Duke Ulrich's own fiefdom to prevent the peasant uprising army from flowing into the Duke's own fiefdom. Of course, the interests of the nobles under the Duke's confidence must also be taken into account. Then, as for the interests of other nobles, Duke Ulrich said I don't care. Moreover, the more unlucky the nobles who are not on his side are, the happier he is. Because the interests lost by those unlucky nobles will mostly belong to him in the end. After the two sides reached an agreement, Kohler rushed back without stopping. According to the agreement reached by both parties, after Kohler returned, he would send 7,000 elite soldiers to build a bunker similar to the noble turret on the border of Duke Ulrich's fiefdom to guard the safety of the Duke's private territory. Of course, some people will also help guard the fiefdoms of the Duke's close ministers and the nobles who support the Duke. At the same time, Duke Ulrich will also organize his nobles to gather troops in the country and drive away the peasant uprising army according to the plan. The peasant rebels followed the route he set and ravaged the territories of the nobles who were not on the same page with the Duke. In the end, the ending was that the peasant army followed the route set by the Duke and ravaged the small nobles and landlords along the way, but was finally robbed by Duke Ulrich. Marin got his wish and got tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of people to develop the American colonies. According to Marin's estimate, he could get at least tens of thousands of immigrants after this uprising. With these people, he would not only develop the land of New Jersey in the future. He could expand inland to the west, or establish colonies in other coastal areas. But in order to prevent the colonies from being interfered with by others, Marin preferred to place these tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of immigrants on the coastal line, so as to achieve the goal of completely controlling the eastern coast of the United States in the future, and not giving other countries the opportunity to find a gap. But the North American colonies are so large that tens of thousands of people can't make any waves at all. So, Marin made up his mind, this time he would find a way to get more than 100,000 people away from the Principality of Württemberg, even if it cost a high price. But just after he made up his mind, he realized a serious problem. it seemed that he didn't have much money. Of course, this doesn't mean that Marin is poor. Marin is very rich, but most of his property is in the form of food and liquor. Marin really wants to sell all these properties and exchange them for cash. However, the amount of gold and silver in Europe is limited, and a lot of money is spent every year to purchase Indian spices and other types of Middle Eastern goods. Therefore, Europe is now short of money. Similarly, Marin is also short of money. Chapter 1520, Prospecting School. Since he wanted to occupy Sado Island, Marin must have consulted Kanfu Mizuko, a Japanese native. Moreover, the occupation of Sado Island must not be in the name of Marin, but in the name of Kanfu Mizuko, a noble lady of the Kanfu clan, in order to reduce resistance. The most important thing is that if you rule the local area in the name of the Japanese daimyo, you will encounter less resistance. Otherwise, there will be rebellions all day long, and Marin's army will not be able to cope with it no matter how strong it is. But the problem is that Sado Island is also a Ryutaku country. Although the koku is only 17,000 koku, which is not even 1/10 of the 175,000 koku of Osumi province, they are also serious daimyo. It is easy for you to destroy them, but what name to use is a big problem. Without a name and righteousness, it is difficult to rule steadily. Kanfu Mizuko thought for a while and said, "My husband, I heard that although Sado province was ruled by the Hanma clan, because the Hanma clan had infeft their illegitimate sons, the power in Sado province was dispersed and there were constant internal strife. Before leaving Japan, I heard that the branch families of the Hanma clan in Hamogo and the branch families of the Hanma clan in Kawahara were very powerful, and they had many conflicts with the main family of the Hanma clan in Zatai Castle. So you mean to support one of the three families, use them as puppets, and secretly control Sado province?" Marin nodded. He thought this was a good idea and the least likely to cause a backlash. Then, Marin asked again, "Who is the strongest among these three families?" Ganfu Mizuko thought for a while and replied, "It seems to be the Hanamo Homa clan. I heard that Sado Island is mainly divided into three. The main family of the Hanma clan mainly controls the central Zatai castle and the surrounding areas, while the Hanamo Homa clan mainly controls the southernmost tip of the island and has a port to trade with the main island. As for the Kawahara Homa clan, they mainly control the northern part of Sado Island. Their strength is comparable to that of the main family, but they are all weaker than the Hanamo Homa clan branch. The Hanamo Homa clan is the only one in power." Marin was stunned. He seemed to have read a book about the Japanese warring states in his previous life, which clearly said that the Kawahara clan in the north of Sado Island controlled the Tsuruko silver mine and had the strength to fight against the Hanamo clan. Marin's memory is of course correct, but that was in the late warring states period. The Tsuruko silver mine was actually discovered by merchants from Echigo province in 1542. Now the Kawahara clan certainly does not have the silver mine as a financial backing. Therefore, naturally, they could not compete with the Yuma clan who had trade. In fact, the Yuma clan was stronger than the main family and the branch family of Kawahara because of its strength. As a result, in 1524, the Yuma clan destroyed the main family and became the guardian of Sado Island. But then the Kawahara branch family in the north discovered the Tsuruko silver mine. With the silver mine as a financial backing, they naturally had the capital to fight against the Yuma clan who replaced the main family. Then, the two families fought for decades, and their brains were beaten out. The dispute between the two families was actually a fight between chickens, but the man is innocent but guilty of holding a treasure, and the Tsuruko silver mine of the Kawahara family eventually attracted a powerful covetous person. Yusuji Kenshin sent a large army to Sado Island in 1589, and cleaned up the Yuma clan and the Kawahara clan together. So far, the rule of the Hanma clan on Sado Island has ended. However, in later generations, the most famous thing about Sado Island is the Sado gold mine in the Ikawa area in the west. Marin, who had seen the map of Sado Island before, only remembered that Sado gold mine was a little north of the small peninsula west of the harbor in the southwest of Sado Island. Then, there was Kinbei Mountain in the inland area in the northeast. As for Tsuruko silver mine, he really had no impression. Maybe, Tsuruko silver mine had been mined out in later generations. But in any case, Tsuruko silver mine was the fuse that attracted the Yusuji clan to send troops to destroy the Hanma clan, so its output and grade must be not low. Otherwise, it would not have attracted Yusuji Kenshin to spend a lot of money to send troops across the sea. Anyway, Marin will send prospectors to conduct a careful survey in the mountainous area in the northern half of the island. These gold and silver mountains were discovered in the 16th century, so it must not be difficult to find. Otherwise, the ancients did not have the technology to find them. The gold and silver mines in later generations are mainly underground mines, because the gold and silver mines on the surface have long been mined by the ancients. After all, the ancients were not stupid. Only gold and silver mines buried deep underground, or inaccessible gold and silver mines in the mountains, will be left for future generations to mine. Marin certainly has no ability to detect underground mines, but the surface mines that ancient people can find can definitely be found as long as enough people are sent. However, in ancient times, prospecting for minerals had no detectors, no airplanes, and no drones. It was all done by manual labor, which was very inefficient. But there was no way, after all, the conditions in ancient times were like this. If you want to find minerals, you can only rely on manpower to pile them up. Considering that the Yuma clan is now the only one on Sado Island, but the righteousness is with the main family. Therefore, Marin thought again and again and decided first to seduce the Yuma clan to annex or expel the main family, and then send troops to capture Sado Island in the name of helping the main family of the Hanma clan to restore its position. Then, send people to prospect for minerals. As for how to operate, this is very simple. Marin only needs to sell a batch of sophisticated weapons and armor to the Yuma clan at a low price to fuel their ambitions. With sophisticated weapons and armor, and with his original ambition, Marin didn't believe they could resist annexing the main family. After all, being the daimyo of Sado province was very attractive to the Yuma clan. The Yuma clan was rich, and they had sophisticated weapons and armor. Once the fight started, the main family of the Hanma clan would definitely be unable to resist. When the Yuma clan beat the main family of the Hanma clan to nothing, Marin's army could appear in the name of Savior to help the main family of the Hanma clan restore the rule of Sado Island. By then, the main family of the Hanma clan had nothing and could only listen to Marin's manipulation. Of course, Marin had no interest in manipulating the Hanma clan. He was only interested in mining the gold and silver mountains of Sado Island. As long as the Hanma clan was sensible and did not interfere with his mining of gold and silver, he would not mind handing over the control of the farmland on those islands to the main family of the Hanma clan. Anyway, those two crooked melons and cracked dates are not worth much money. And with the main family of the Hanma clan as a puppet, Marin's control over Sado Island has no legal obstacles. This plan is much milder than the direct annexation he had thought of before, and it is less likely to cause resistance. However, in addition to the army, Marin felt that he should train a group of prospectors to find gold and silver mines. Otherwise, it would be a shame if the territory was occupied but gold and silver mines could not be found. It just so happened that Marin now seized the Ramelsberg silver mine near the city of Goslar. Marin decided to rely on this silver mine to train a group of engineers who are good at identifying and finding gold and silver mines. To this end, Marin signed an order to establish the Goslar Prospecting School on the mine outside the city of Goslar, specializing in the training of prospecting engineers, majoring in the exploration, mining and smelting of gold and silver mines. As for other types of minerals, there is no hurry, just focus on the gold and silver mines first. After all, Marin has no shortage of other metals, but gold and silver. As for the trainees, Marin thinks that they should be selected to keep their mouths shut, so as to avoid the news of the gold and silver mines leaking out and attracting the covetousness of other countries. For this reason, Marin asked Kohler to select a group of reliable and physically strong teenagers. Climbing mountains to find mines is a physical job, and send them to the prospecting school in Goslar to learn how to identify and explore gold and silver mines from the old engineers in the mine. After they have learned well, they will be sent to Sado Island in Japan to explore Sado Gold Mine, Suruko Silver Mine and Osu Silver Mine for Marin.